Fellow calm observers, I am Maggie Liu. The game system we're breaking down today has a highly unusual starting setup. It is not a one-sided rebirth, but both parties returning to the starting point simultaneously with full memories of their past lives. What does this mean? It means this isn't a revenge, but a life and death game of chess with symmetrical information. Let's dive into this story about shared memories, mutual scheming, and precise counterkills. Pei-Chin and I were reborn at the same time. In this life, he knew in advance that he would become a third-rank high official, and he knew in advance that he would be the top favorite of the future new emperor, and his only regret from his past life was not marrying his little childhood sweetheart. So he didn't hesitate to dump me right when we were doing our wedding vows, and went off to find his little childhood sweetheart who was about to be exiled. As for me, I didn't cry or make a scene, and chose to step aside for them. But when he wanted to come back, he found that the one standing right next to me was the future crown prince. When I saw Pei-Chin drop the red silk in his hand and turn around to walk straight out, I realized that I had been reborn. Red candles were burning high in the wedding hall, and a dense crowd of guests watching the ceremony sat around, everyone wearing a polite smile. Father Pei, who was waiting for Pei-Chin and me to bow to the parents, sprang up furiously and slammed a palm on the table, shaking the red dates and longans on it to roll all over the floor. "You rebellious son, where are you going?" Pei-Chin didn't break his stride, not even turning his head back. I watched his back walk down the petal-covered aisle in the middle of the wedding hall. The hem of his wedding robe swept across the petals on the floor, crushing them into a trail of broken red. I stared at his back for 3 breaths, my hands slowly clenching into fists inside my sleeves. I knew where he was going. Yesterday evening, the steward working for my father secretly passed me a message the verdict for the Liu family's case would come down today, and the imperial edict punishing them would arrive at the Liu residence's gates by noon at the latest. I deliberately delayed the auspicious time for the wedding ceremony by an hour, just to wait for this very moment. Pei-Chin had a white moonlight in his heart, a childhood sweetheart he grew up with named Liu Susu. In my previous life, on the night we got married, Liu Susu's father was thrown in jail for embezzling military funds. The Liu family was raided, and the rest of the family was waiting to be exiled. The next day before dawn, Liu Susu sneaked away from the escorted crowd and knelt at the Pei family's back door covered in mud, begging him to save her. Pei's father didn't want any trouble, so he just had someone shove a bag of loose silver through the crack in the door and sent her packing. Pei-Chin, on the other hand, just couldn't let it go. He ran around everywhere calling in favors, and didn't even come with me on the day I visited my parents after the wedding. At the time, keeping in mind that the Pei and Liu families were old family friends, I didn't say much even though I felt really wronged. I was even worried my parents would scold him for treating me badly, so I covered for him in front of them, saying he was tied up with official business and would come over as soon as he was done. But I didn't expect that right after I got back to the Pei residence from my maiden home before my seat was even warm. Pei-Chin would bring Liu Susu right in front of me and say right off the bat that he wanted to take her as a concubine. It was during the 12th lunar month. Liu Susu stood behind Pei-Chin in a plain white dress. Her eyes as red as 2 peaches, her body so frail it looked like a gust of wind could blow her over. She looked at me timidly and then lowered her head again. Anyone who saw that weak and pitiful look of hers would soften their heart a bit. Pei-Chin said, "Ayun, Susu and I have known each other since we were kids. We're like brother and sister. I really can't bear to see her suffer the hardship of exile, so I want to take her as a concubine. Saving a life is better than building a 7-story pagoda. Ayun, you are naturally kind-hearted. You definitely couldn't bear to see a weak woman like her suffer and die, right?" He spoke with a gentle tone and sincere eyes, as if he was discussing the most ordinary household matter with me. He even reached out to hold my hand and went on, "Don't worry, I only see Susu as a sister, and she'll only be my concubine in name. We won't cross any lines. The only person I love is you, Ayun." And Liu Susu just stood beside him, sobbing with her head down, occasionally wiping the corners of her eyes with her sleeve. That look of hers, even I couldn't help but feel pity for her. The Liu family got into trouble, and normally the whole clan would be implicated. The current emperor decreed that the silver the Liu family embezzled was enough to cover the military pay for the borderlands for 3 years, making Father Liu's crime unpardonable. Fortunately, the new emperor hasn't been on the throne for long and didn't want to go on a killing spree, so he only sentenced the entire family to exile. The road to exile is 3,000 miles long, with poisonous miasma, wild beasts, and bandits along the way. Out of 10 people, barely 1 or 2 can make it to the frontier alive for a pampered official's daughter like Lu Susu. Taking this road is practically a death sentence. But there is one rule: the Liu family's crime doesn't implicate married-out daughters. As long as Lu Susu marries someone, whether as a wife or a concubine, she can be removed from the Liu family's household registry and escape the doom of exile. It is just that the emperor has condemned them, and everyone in the capital is avoiding the Liu family like the plague. No family wants to mess with this bad luck at such a critical moment. Only Pei Qin, who is deeply devoted to Lu Susu, is rushing headlong to wade into this muddy water. Pei Qin claimed he only treated Lu Susu as a sister, but when he looked at her, his gaze was clearly that of someone looking at their sweetheart. It was exactly the way I looked at him back then, my heart and eyes completely filled with that person. Before we got married, I had no idea that Pei Qin had a sweetheart. My Shi family is a prominent aristocratic family. My father, She Biong, is the current prime minister, and his students and former subordinates are all over the court and the country. Half of the civil officials in the court have to cut their hands and call him Master Shi when they see him. The Shi family's power is too great, so great that it makes the emperor wary. His Majesty the Emperor has 3 adult princes, among whom the Crown Prince, Xiao Hengzhou, is the most favored. That spring, when I attended a banquet in the palace, I exchanged a few extra words with the Crown Prince, and that very night my father called my mother into the study overnight, and they discussed things for a full 2 hours. The next day my mother began to arrange my marriage. I didn't understand it then, but only later did I realize that my father saw His Majesty the Emperor intended to match me with the Crown Prince, but he didn't want a daughter of the Xi family to be dragged into the struggle for imperial power. Marrying into the royal family looks glorious on the surface, but in reality, it is living your life with a knife pressed to your neck. My father would rather I marry a decent young man from a middle-tier household than have me become the crown princess. Right at this moment, Pei Qin appeared. He was the newly minted 3rd-place scholar in the imperial exams that year. In his early 20s, with a middle-tier family background, his father was a 5th-ranked director in the Ministry of Revenue. Though not incredibly rich or noble, they had the advantage of an upright family reputation. More importantly, this guy Pei Qin was extremely handsome. This graceful, refined gentleman just standing there looked like a figure stepping right out of a painting. Back then, I was just a young girl yearning for love, usually cooped up deep in my boudoir reading and doing embroidery, seeing a young gentleman like Pei Qin, who was so humorous in speech and outstanding in looks. How could my heart not flutter? He intentionally flirted, and my heart was moved. One thing led to another, and my father saw what was on my mind, so he took charge and arranged this marriage. After the marriage between the 2 families was settled, Pei Qin would often send things to the Shi family. Sometimes it was wildflowers picked by the roadside while out of the city playing, neatly tied together with a grass stalk, with a small note attached saying, "Encountered this flower on the road, thought of a Yoon." Sometimes it was the most fashionable hairpins and cosmetics in the capital, packed in a carved wooden box, which even my mother saw and said he was thoughtful. Or it might be a new dish he tasted while socializing with others, like the osmanthus cake from that newly opened shop in the south of the city. After buying it, he would pack it into a food box while it was hot, and have his attendant ride a fast horse to deliver it in the mansion for me to taste, and the cake would still be steaming hot when it reached my hands. Besides items and food, Pei Qin would also write letters to me. In the letters, he wrote about the interesting things happening in the capital every day, the gossip he heard from his colleagues, and the beautiful lines he stumbled upon while reading. His writing was brilliant and full of witty remarks. I read those letters over and over again, pressing them under my pillow, and before going to sleep, I'd always pull them out to read a couple of lines. At that time, I felt this person was incredibly interesting, and that by marrying him, my life would never be lonely. Before we got married, Pei Qin even kneeled in front of my father and swore he'd never take a concubine in his life. Father sat upright in the hall, staring at him seriously for a long time before slowly nodding. I hid behind the screen, peeking, my heart sweet as honey. So when the words about him wanting to take a concubine came out of his mouth, that sweet pavilion in my heart collapsed completely. I didn't agree, nor did I refuse. I just had someone fetch Pei's father and mother and sent someone on a fast horse back to the Prime Minister's residence to invite my father over. How could the Pei family parents allow their son to offend the current Prime Minister for the daughter of a condemned official? Pei's father brought out the family discipline tool on the spot. That tung oil-soaked cane whipped onto Pei Chin's back. 1 lash and his clothes split open. 3 lashes and blood showed. I sat aside watching coldly, my heart full of pain and hate. Father even directly threatened that if Pei Chin insisted on taking a concubine, he would have me divorce him. Hearing this, Pei's father turned pale, kneeling on the ground apologizing over and over, while Pei's mother cried and pulled Pei Chin's sleeve to make him admit his mistake. In the end, Liu Susu stepped forward herself. With tears on her face, her voice choked but her tone firm. Brother Chin, don't put yourself in a tough spot. Susu is fated for this. It has nothing to do with anyone else. I'll go back right now and be exiled along with my family. After saying that, she turned and left. Her skirt caught on the threshold, and she stumbled off, disappearing into the night. Pei Chin watched her back as she left, and I'll never forget the look on his face for the rest of my life. That kind of piercing. Bone-deep pain was like someone had carved a piece of flesh right out of his chest. He was mad at me for days. I went to look for him in his study, and he just read his book with his back to me, not turning a single page. I brought him ginseng soup, and he left it to get cold on the table without taking a sip. In the end, I couldn't help but be the first to give in. I put in the money and effort to find people to grease the wheels for the Liu family, slipping silver to the escorting guards so they wouldn't suffer too much on their way to exile. I even went home and begged my father. He sighed and agreed, saying that after a few years when the heat died down, he'd secretly arranged for someone to bring Liu Susu back to the capital. I did all these things behind Pei Chin's back, and when he found out, he finally made up with me. At night, he held my hand, looked at me in the candlelight, and said, "Ayun, I'll definitely never let you down in this life." I believed him, but who would have thought? Not long after, I got the news Liu Susu couldn't handle the suffering of exile and died of illness halfway there. She died by a muddy official road. Word is that before she took her last breath, she kept calling Pei Chin's name. She called it all night until her voice went hoarse, and finally died with her eyes wide open. The day the news reached the Pei family, Pei Chin was in the study writing official documents. After hearing it, he didn't cry or make a fuss, just put down his pen, slowly stood up, and then collapsed headfirst onto the ground. He fell severely ill, running a fever for 7 whole days, and when he was delirious, he repeated only 2 words over and over again, Susu. After waking up, he had lost a whole lot of weight, his cheekbones jutting out. He leaned against the head of the bed, looking at the bed curtains above, and said calmly, "If anyone is to blame, blame her father for his corruption. Blame her own bad luck." I thought he had come to terms with it. After that, Pei Chin never mentioned Liu Susu or the Liu family again. Instead, he treated me exceptionally well. He made soup for me, painted my eyebrows, and even when I failed to conceive for years, he never said a single word of blame. Every time Mother Pei beat around the bush about how I couldn't produce heirs for the Pei family, he would step up and take the blame onto himself, saying he was too busy with official duties and had neglected his wife. I returned the favor, asking my father to pull strings and pave the way for him in the court, handled his social affairs, and managed the household while socializing with the madams of various families. Pei Chin really lived up to expectations before he even turned 30. He held a 3rd-rank position, became the Vice Minister of Revenue, and was the #1 favorite of the new emperor, entering and leaving the palace as if it were his own backyard. I thought I would spend the rest of my life deeply in love with him, just like this, until my father suddenly passed away from illness. Father was always in good health. He got sick just like that, and passed away just like that. I cried until I passed out in the morning hall. When I woke up, I found Pei Chin standing outside the morning hall, his hands behind his back, looking at the moon in the sky. The expression on his face, illuminated by the moonlight, was actually indifferent, as if he were watching a scenery that had nothing to do with him. Then my older brother died in an accident. He fell off a horse and broke his neck. Everyone said it was an accident. But my brother had exquisite riding skills and had been trained in the military since he was a teenager. How could he easily fall off a horse? When my little brother was 17, a letter colluding with the enemy was discovered. Out of nowhere, disaster struck, and our entire family was sentenced to execution. When the imperial edict arrived at the gates of Shea Manor, it was snowing heavily, and a vast expanse of white covered the stone lions at the door. Over 100 people in the manor were strung together with chains, dragged to the entrance of Westmarket and beheaded one by one. The executioner's blade dulled, and the blood melted the snow on the ground into a patch of red mud. I stood alone in the backyard of Pay Residence, looking at that streak of thick smoke on the horizon that was the smoke from burning corpses. Over 100 people of the Shi family didn't even leave behind an intact corpse after dying. They were all piled up in a mass grave outside the city, doused with oil and set on fire. It wasn't until then that I finally knew the truth. Pei Qin never forgot Lu Susu's death. He pinned all the hatred on my Shi family. He hated my father because when Lu Susu came asking for help, my father said, "If you take a concubine, I'll have my daughter divorce you." He hated my older brother because my brother was the vice minister of war at the time, and the guards responsible for escorting the exiled prisoners were exactly his subordinates. He hated my younger brother because a forged treasonous letter could wipe out the entire Shi family. He hated me even more because out of everyone, I was the one he shouldn't have loved the most, yet he just had to marry me. That night, he locked me in a side room in the front courtyard. Dry firewood was piled up outside the room. He stood at the door holding a torch, the firelight reflecting on his face, looking completely different from that boy in my past life who wrote letters to me in the study. He said, "Shi Yun, you what your Shea family owes Susu must be paid in blood." The sound of the torch hitting the ground was very light, like a flower falling onto water. Then came the overwhelming fire surging from all directions. The tongues of fire licked up my skirt hem, licked my arms, licked my cheeks. I screamed his name in the fire 100 times, 1,000 times. He stood outside the door, not moving an inch. Right before I died, I heard his last words, his voice very soft, tinged with a sob. He said, "Ayun, how great it would be if we had never met." Ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. So when the red silk fell from Pei Qin's hands to the ground, I watched his back as he strode away, telling him word by word in my heart, "Pei Qin, in this life, it is my turn to burn you." Before I even had time to think about how to stop this wedding, Pei Qin moved way faster than I did. Seeing his impatient look, I was sure he had been reborn too. He remembered everything from his past life. Remembered Lu Susu's death. Remembered how he used the power of my Shi family to climb to a high position step by step, and remembered how he finally burned me to death in a fire. He remembered it all. But the first thing he did after being reborn wasn't to come beg for my forgiveness, nor to make up for his mistakes, but to choose Lu Susu all over again. Pei Qin didn't stop walking, nor did he answer Father Pei's words. Father Pei was shaking all over with anger, his voice vibrating so loudly that the dust on the beams came rustling down. "Pei Qin, don't you dare!" Mother Pei was also stomping her feet anxiously on the side, her voice shrill and rushed. "Chinair, can't whatever it is wait until after you finish the wedding bows with so many guests watching? Are you going to completely throw away the Pei family's face?" The hall full of guests whispered to each other, the buzzing discussions circling the room like a huge swarm of flies. Some were watching the drama with folded arms, some were whispering to ask about the old gossip of the Liu family, and others were secretly peeking at me, wanting to see what kind of reaction I, the bride who was publicly dumped, would have. Pei Qin's hand inside his sleeve was clenched tight, his knuckles turning white right now. He was tearing himself apart inside. Of course, he knew he should stay and finish the wedding. The Shi family was the stepping stone for his rapid rise to Qingyun in his past life. Without Shi Yun and the Shi family's help, trying to climb to a third-rank high official in this life would be harder than reaching the sky. He spent nearly 20 years in his previous life, calculating and plotting every step of the way, and none of it could have been done without the backing of the Shi family's power. But his head was full of Lu Susu's face. When the news of her dying on the exile road arrived in his past life, he was in his study going over official papers. As soon as the messenger finished that sentence, The brush dropped from his hand onto the paper, the ink seeping into a giant blot. Sitting in his chair, his body slowly slid down, his stomach churning like crazy, and he ended up hunched over the desk, throwing up a mouthful of blood. That blood stained the paper, brush handle, and crept into the cracks between his fingers. He remembered that rusty metallic stink for his whole life. He killed so many people after that, got so much blood on his hands. But he never forgot the taste of that mouthful of blood that was the taste of the news of Lu Susu's death. In this life, he absolutely couldn't let Susu die again. Even if this was the very first day of his rebirth, even if the price was losing Shiyun all over again. Pei Qin's footsteps paused for only a moment before he turned around as if just waking from a dream. He said to Father and Mother Pei, "Father, Mother, I have an urgent matter to handle right away. I'll explain it to you when I get back." There was no room for negotiation in his tone. It wasn't a son making a request to his parents, but more like a superior giving orders to his subordinates. Then he looked at me, through the gazes of a hall full of guests, through the red silk and flower petals scattered on the ground. He glanced at me. It was a very complex and indescribable look, containing guilt, reluctance, hesitation, and a completely confident certainty. He probably thought that since I loved him so much in our past life, no matter how angry I was in this life, I would forgive him eventually, because every single time in our past life, I was always the first to give in. He said, "Ayun, be good. Once I finish my business, I'll come back to perform the wedding ceremony and marry you." This was a very young and handsome face. The 26-year-old Pei Qin had delicate features and a face as flawless as jade, wearing the bright red wedding robe. He looked just like a handsome top scholar stepping right out of a book. But the tone he used when he said this was already the habit he only developed years later when he became a third-rank official holding great power. He was used to instructing me, ordering me around, and treating me like a chess piece he could manipulate at will. Looking at this face in our past life, I was filled with joy. On our wedding night, when he lifted my veil, my heart beat so fast it almost jumped right out of my throat. But looking at it again at this moment, I only felt overwhelming hatred in my heart. If it weren't for the handle of the wedding fan I was holding digging painfully into my palm, I would have loved to rush up and tear off his face, to see how he could still use this affectionate look to deceive people. I threw the red silk in my hand onto the ground, and at the same time took down the wedding fan blocking my face, turned sideways and looked straight at Pei Qin. My voice was very calm when I spoke, so calm that even I was a little surprised. "Pei Qin, are you calling off the wedding in public?" I used my questioning tone to suppress the churning hatred in my heart and put on just the right amount of anger on my face. I couldn't let him see that I had been reborn. It wasn't the right time yet. This chess piece had to be moved slowly, making every step catch him off guard. Pei Qin didn't offer any defense, only slightly frowning to show his dissatisfaction. "Ayun, I don't have time to humor your petty temper right now. Be good." After he finished speaking, he turned around and strode towards the door. My face turned cold, and my voice suddenly shot up, loud enough for half the street to hear. "Pei Qin, I don't care what massive emergency you have. If you don't make yourself clear today, don't even think about stepping out of this door." As soon as I finished speaking, the dowry servants and maids I brought from my maiden home rushed out in unison, lining up at the door to block Pei Qin's way. These people were all brought by me from the Prime Minister's residence, and they only take orders from me. Leading them was my wet nurse's son, Zhao Danyu, broad-shouldered and thick-waisted. He planted himself in the doorway looking exactly like a solid door panel. Anger finally showed on Pei Qin's face when he turned back to look at me. His eyes were full of impatience. "Jae-yoon, do you really have to make a scene right now? I don't have time to put up with your nonsense. We'll talk about everything when I get back." In his eyes, my anger right now was just me throwing a tantrum and acting up, because in every argument during my past life, all it took was a casual word from him, and I would obediently do as told. He thought this time would be the same, but he was wrong. Pei Qin forced his way out the door in front of everyone, shoving Zhao Danyu so hard he stumbled. His motion of hopping onto the horse was sharp, though with his bright red wedding robe spreading out on the horse's back like a flag. I shot a look behind his back, and Xunhua immediately arranged for two clever footmen to trail him from a distance. Pei Qin left, leaving a mess in the wedding hall. The hall full of guests looked at each other in dismay, and some had already started walking out, laughing and shaking their heads. Father Pei was so angry he sat in his armchair, panting heavily. Mother Pei was quick on her feet, giving me an apologetic smile while ordering the servants, "Simone, come, quickly help the young madam to the bridal chamber to rest." I knew exactly what she was scheming: pacify the bride first, and deal with the rest behind closed doors. I immediately interrupted her, my eyes turning red, and 2 streams of tears fell on cue. Having lived for decades in my past life, the tears I had shed in front of Pei Chin over the years were more than the rain in the sky. Squeezing out a few drops right now was simply a piece of cake. "Lord Pei, Madam Pei," my voice carried just the right amount of sobbing. "You both saw Pei Chin's attitude just now with your own eyes. I merely asked for a reason, and he said I was making a scene. I, too, am a lady who grew up pampered in the Shi family, doted on in the palms of my parents' hands for 17 years. I didn't come to your Pei family to be bullied. It is not like I must marry Pei Chin." Without waiting for Mother Pei's reaction, I turned around and gave a slight curtsy to the crowd that had not yet dispersed, saying loudly, "I ask all the esteemed guests to bear witness and come with me to see exactly what incredibly urgent matter the Pei family's young master has that is actually worth him abandoning his new bride during the wedding ceremony. Who doesn't love watching a good show, especially when it is a cheating scumbag's drama?" The moment my words came out, 7 or 8 people immediately stepped up to chime in. Several of them didn't get along with Father Pei, and right now their eyes were totally lit up. Chenhua was sharp, immediately leading a few maids to clear the way in front. I walked at the front with red eyes, my head held high and chest puffed out, leading a massive, sprawling crowd behind me. Following the info brought back by the servant boy who was tailing them, we headed straight for the Liu family's place. Going from the Pei residence to the Liu family's place meant crossing half the capital city, walking all the way from Lushu Alley in the North City to Duke Avenue in the South City. The crowd of onlookers grew bigger and bigger along the way, with busybodies darting out of roadside tea houses to tag along behind our group. By the time we got to the Liu family's entrance, a few hundred people had already gathered, packing the street in front of the Liu house so densely that it was completely block solid. I looked up at the sky. Dusk was falling, the last ray of sunset glow on the horizon was fading, and the 2 white lanterns in front of the Liu mansion's doors had already been hung up. The timing was perfectly planned. The imperial edict condemning them had just arrived, and the eunuch delivering the decree was standing on the steps, shrilly reading it aloud. And Pei Chin was kneeling right on the stone steps at the Liu family's entrance, one hand gripping Liu Susu's arm in a death grip, looking up and shouting at the lead official receiving the edict. "Susu is my Pei Chin's concubine. She is no longer a Liu family daughter. A married-out daughter is like spilled water. You have no right to exile her." Before his voice died away, he turned his head and saw me standing at the front of the crowd. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. Was it an explanation, an excuse, or was he going to tell me to be a good girl again? I didn't give him the chance. I blinked hard, the tears in my eyes sparkling in the lantern light. Before he could speak, I said loudly, my voice reaching the ears of every single person present crystal clear. "Pei Chin, so you wouldn't go through with our wedding ceremony just so you could go out and take a concubine?" The gasps and discussions around us exploded like a pot boiling over. I closed my eyes, 2 lines of tears rolling down my cheeks, my voice sorrowful, but every word perfectly clear. "Fine. Since that is how it is, then I'll grant you your wish. The engagement is off from this day forward. The Pei and Xie families will have absolutely nothing to do with each other ever again." After saying that, I turned and walked away, my skirt flapping decisively in the wind. Behind me, Pei Chin kept calling my name over and over, but I didn't look back once. Liu Susu, the woman Pei Chin obsessed over his whole life, the one who meant more to him than the lives of my entire Shi family, was only worth a concubine status in his words. He refused to make Liu Susu his official wife, yet he wanted me to die for this concubine's title. How ironic. After that night, the situation blew up way faster than anyone expected. The news that Pei Chin insisted on taking a Liu family daughter as a concubine right when the Liu family was raided and condemned spread all over town in less than a night. Storytellers in the tea houses had already spun a storybook, vividly narrating the scandalous tale of the Tanwa scholar abandoning his new bride, storming doors from miles away for a criminal woman. The common folks treated it as a joke, but the shrewd foxes in the court didn't smell a joke. They smelled murder. His Majesty, the Emperor, had only been on the throne for 3 years, and his biggest taboo was subjects disrespecting imperial authority. The Liu family embezzled military funds, and His Majesty, the Emperor, personally decreed strict punishment according to the law with no leniency. But Pei Qin had some nerve the moment the condemning imperial edict was read out. He stood right at the Liu family's door and loudly announced he was taking the Liu family's daughter as a concubine. If that isn't disrespecting the Emperor, what is memorials impeaching? Pei Qin and Father Pei fluttered to the imperial desk like snowflakes. The first to make a move was a censor from the censorate, whose memorial cut like a knife with every word. Tanwa Pei Qin shows contempt for the imperial edict, and vainly attempts to break the law by taking a criminal woman as a concubine. Where does this place the dignity of the Son of Heaven? I implore His Majesty the Emperor to punish him severely without mercy, as a warning to others. After that, officials from the Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Personnel, and Ministry of Rights submitted memorials one after another. Some were disciples on good terms with my father, while others were pure opportunists just trying to show their loyalty in front of His Majesty, the Emperor. Overnight, Pei Qin turned from a Tanhua with a boundless future in the Hanlin Academy into a public target. His Majesty, the Emperor's red ink rescript came down quickly. The Emperor was furious, stating that he was arrogant and ignored the court's laws. He was expelled from the Hanlin Academy, demoted to an 8th-rank county deputy magistrate, and sent off to remote Zhengzhou for his new post. Father Pei was also implicated, scolded for failing to discipline his sons strictly, fined half a year's salary, demoted from a 5th-rank director to a 6th-rank secretary, and temporarily kept in the capital to see how he behaves later. The wrath of the Son of Heaven shocked the entire court. Those families who were originally on good terms with the Pei family quickly drew a clear line, and even the entrance to the alley where the Pei family was located became much more deserted. Before Pei Qin even left for his post in Zhangzhou, the people in the capital were already treating him like the god of plague. The price the Pei family paid for a criminal concubine kept the commoners happily gossiping for over half a month. Pei Qin even became a negative example for official families when lecturing their unfilial sons. Don't be like that Pei family boy, refusing to marry the Prime Minister's daughter and insisting on taking the daughter of a criminal official as a concubine. Now his future is completely ruined, and he dragged the whole family down with him. Ironically enough, with all this gossip flying around, it actually overshadowed the fact that I was abandoned at my wedding. People's attention was entirely on Pei Qin's misfortune, and no one gossiped anymore about the bride who got publicly dumped. It wasn't a waste of my precise timing, letting Pei Qin rush out of the house and bringing people over exactly when the imperial edict was being read. I rehearsed this perfectly interlocked timeline in my head countless times, ever since crawling out of that fire in my previous life. There wasn't a single night where I didn't think about what I would do if I went back to the day everything started, so I could pay back every single ounce of the pain he inflicted on me. The first step was to ruin his future. It is easy for him to take a fall from the Hanlin Academy, but climbing back up is going to be tough. And next up, there is even more exciting stuff. Half a month later, right at the tail end of Sunny March, the Zifu crabapple tree in the courtyard was in full bloom. I sat under the window reading for fun, with the Bailuochen Tea Chunhua had just brewed right at hand. The steam curled upwards, illuminated by the light shining in through the window into fine white lines. Kanhua was beside me embroidering a shoe upper, occasionally poking her head to peek out the window, complaining about the weather getting hot too fast. This peace and quiet didn't last long. Chunhua hadn't even done a few more stitches before a little servant girl guarding the gate outside ran in a panic. She tripped over the door sill, and even her hairbun came half undone. Miss, bad news. That bastard Pei Qin came to the door with betrothal gifts, saying he wants to propose to you again. He even set off firecrackers, drawing a whole crowd to watch the show, and blocked the entrance to our estate completely. Chunhua was so furious, she threw the shoe upper onto the floor, stood up and cursed. Bah, he still has the nerve to show his face. He did all those heartless things and got demoted, and now he remembers our miss. Miss, you absolutely must not go out there. I'll get someone to chase him away. I put down my book and was about to speak when the brocade curtain of the partition behind me was lifted from the inside. A deep, smiling male voice rang out a step ahead of me. Miss Shi, it seems your ex-fiancé hasn't learned his lesson yet. Do you need this prince to step in and chase him away for you? Shunhua was so scared she knelt down on the spot. My guest was exactly the current crown prince, Xiao Hengzhou. Xiao Hengzhou showing up in my room at this hour naturally wasn't to look at crabapple blossoms. A month ago I approached him on my own for the first time. That was in the palace's imperial garden. He was standing with his hands tucked into his sleeves under an old plum tree, watching the snow. It was spring snow, a thin layer resting on the stone steps, and a little had landed on his shoulders too. I bowed to him from about a dozen steps away and said, "Your Highness, I have an important matter to discuss. It concerns your Highness's life, and also the survival of my entire clan." He sized me up for about 10 breaths of time back then said, "I'd like to hear the details." I told him everything he went through in his past life. Qin Xiao being stolen away by the second prince, his leg getting bitten off by a fierce tiger at the mid-autumn hunting grounds, losing his position as the heir, and finally having no way out and raising an army to rebel, only to be killed in the palace by the second prince under the excuse of protecting the emperor. I didn't say I was reborn, just that this was information I got from a reliable source. Whether he believed it or not was entirely up to him. He was silent for a long time, so long that I thought he'd kick me out as a lunatic. Then he spoke, his voice very soft, but every word was like a nail. "For some of the things you mentioned, I've already noticed the signs." That was the start of our partnership. Our later secret meetings were all held in the guest rooms of Tianhua Temple outside the city, using the excuse of me going out to burn incense or attend banquets. For him to visit in person today was a risk, but it also goes to show just how much he hates that dog Pei Qin. No one knows better than me just how miserably the crown prince was plotted against by Pei Qin in the past life. I turned down the crown prince's kind offer. "Your Highness, I can handle a trivial matter like this myself. As for everything else, you just need to proceed with the plan we agreed upon." Xiao Hengzhou nodded and gave me another look. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he just cupped his hands and quietly slipped out the back door. I straightened my clothes and walked out the main entrance with Chunhua and a few maids. The moment the doors opened, a massive wave of sound hit us. The street was already packed with a dense crowd, stretching from the gates of the Prime Minister's residence all the way to the parasol trees at the end of the street. Even the second-floor railings of the tea houses on both sides were completely filled with onlookers leaning over them. Pei Qin really went all out this time. 36 loads of betrothal gifts were neatly stacked on the street, decorated with red silk flowers and gold leaf. The heavy camphor wood chests lined up down the entire street. He stood on the back of a jujube red horse at the very front, wearing a brand new bright red brocade robe, a soft gold threaded belt tied around his waist, and his hair meticulously tied up in a jade crown. He was already extremely handsome to begin with, and dressed up like this. He really looked like a top scholar stepping right out of a painting on a theatre stage. Seeing me come out, he immediately swung off his horse, his movements dashing and swift. He walked up to the steps of the Prime Minister's residence, looking at me with eyes curved in a smile, his voice full of joy. A Yoon. His eyes rippled like spring water, his features picturesque. This call was filled with tender joy, like a spring breeze brushing past my ears, leaving me in a momentary daze. It felt like going back to my past life, back to those years when I was still deeply in love. Back then, whenever he came home, if he just called out to me like this at the front gate, I would run out of the house, lift my skirt, run down the corridor, run through the moon gate, right up to him, and throw myself into his arms. But that daze only lasted for a moment, because the soles of my feet seemed to be faintly burning. That is the memory of being burned, which automatically pops up every time I am about to get soft-hearted. Reminding me of the hell I went through, Pei Qin walked right up to me, looked down at me and spoke in a tone like he was coaxing a child throwing a tantrum. "Yoon, you are not being good. I told you to wait for me to finish my business before we held the wedding ceremony, but you caused such a huge scene, getting me demoted and dragging my father into it too." He could actually still smile while saying this, as if he were just telling a harmless joke. He continued, "But well, I know you are mad inside. I won't hold the past against you. Today I've come to your door to propose again, and I brought double the betrothal gifts from last time. That'll definitely silence all that gossip about you being left at the altar. Are you happy, Ayun?" Pa Shunhua didn't even wait for him to finish before she put her hands on her hips and started cursing. "What the hell do you think you are, daring to keep casually calling my lady's name Ayun? You did scandalous things yourself and got demoted, and now what kind of stunts are you trying to pull? You think you are so great for bringing betrothal gifts. Does our Prime Minister's residence lack this little bit of stuff from you?" I raised my hand to stop Shunhua and looked at Pei Qin. The smile was still plastered on his face, making him look completely certain of himself. He probably thought this deeply affectionate performance of his was flawless, and that I, a woman whose engagement was broken and reputation ruined, was just dying for him to come propose again. As long as he made amends and apologized, I would act just like in my previous life, swallowing all my grievances to continue being his virtuous and meek wife. But he was wrong. He wasn't that powerful third-rank official from his past life anymore, and I wasn't that silly girl who only had eyes for him anymore. Make a fuss. Are you even worthy? I even smiled a bit when I spoke. Pei Qin, even if you knelt down and kowtowed in front of me, I'd still think you are dirtying the ground of my Shi family. Get this straight, it is only because I nodded that you got a marriage contract with me. If I hadn't been young and ignorant back then, blinded by that face of yours, you wouldn't even have the right to step foot at the door of my Prime Minister's residence. The guards who had been waiting at the mansion gates all stepped forward in unison, each holding a wrist-thick wooden stick soaked in tung oil. Beat this riffraff out of here if he dares to resist. Just break his legs, I'll take the blame. The guards got their orders and swung their sticks right at Pei Qin. Pei Qin completely didn't expect me to order a beating right out on the street. Unable to dodge in time, he took a heavy hit to the shoulder from a stick, staggering backward quite a few steps. His heel tripped on a betrothal gift chest, and he almost fell flat on his back. Right at that moment, Lu Susu stumbled out from behind the crowd. She wore an old, plain white dress, her hair just pulled into a loose bun and pinned with a somewhat old silver hairpin. She didn't have any makeup on her face, but there was a ring of redness under her eyes that was a carefully drawn, haggard look. She threw herself to the steps and dropped to her knees with a fifth of fint, kowtowing to me fin bang, bang, bang. 3 times her forehead hitting the bluestone slabs made dull thuds that hurt just to hear. "Please, sister, don't take your anger out on husband." She looked up, her face wet with tears, crying oh so pitifully. "It is all Susu's fault. Susu is the one who ruined things for you. Sister, husband truly likes you. Even though you got him kicked out of the Hanlin Academy and demoted to suffer in a place as far away as Jiangzhou, husband doesn't mean to blame you one bit. He brought betrothal gifts to come and propose again. He genuinely wants to win sister back. If sister really can't stand me, as long as sister agrees to perform the wedding ceremony with husband, Susu will volunteer to go to the nunnery outside the city to shave her head and become a nun, never returning to the Pei residence in this life, and never seeing husband again." After she finished speaking, she kowtowed to Zavang Bang Bang again, and a patch of her forehead was already knocked red. The surrounding commoners stared wide-eyed. Some whispered to each other, saying this Miss Liu was truly a sensible one. Some smacked their lips and sighed, saying that although young Master Pei had made a mistake, at least he had the intention to make amends. And others kept looking at me, as if they wanted to see if I, the Prime Minister's daughter, could be magnanimous enough to forgive him and make a beautiful story out of this. Chunhua jumped down the steps, pointed right at Lu Susu's nose, and cursed loudly. What a pair of shameless adulterers doing the scandalous deed of hooking up without a matchmaker, and you still dare to come to the gates of the Prime Minister's residence to drag my miss into this. As for that filthy place of your Pei family that trades its conscience for a monk's robe, other than you, a cheap wretch who treats a miserable, cheap life like a treasure, who would ever care to marry into it? Beat them all out of here. Don't leave a single one. The guards of the Prime Minister's residence showed no more mercy, swinging their sticks to beat Lu Susu right along with him. Lu Susu let out a terrified scream, hugged her head, and curled up into a ball. Pei Qin, however, lunged forward in a single bound to fiercely protect Lususu in his arms, taking several blows from the sticks directly on her behalf. The sticks smashed against his back with dull thuds. He let out a muffled groan, but his body wrapped around her even tighter. I looked down from the steps and just happened to meet Pei Chin's gaze as he looked up. His eyes were a bit bloodshot, and there was a bruise on his forehead. But what burned in those eyes wasn't weakness, but certainty. He gritted his teeth and lowered his voice to speak to me, sounding like he was negotiating. "Shayon, don't forget our engagement hasn't been cancelled yet. Your mother sent people to ask for the marriage certificate 3 times, and I haven't given it back." I sneered, took a step down the stairs and looked down at him. I reached out a finger, poked his chest, and said something lightly. My voice wasn't loud, but everyone around heard it. "So what? My father is the Prime Minister. Prestige of my C family can crush 3 generations of your Pei family to death. It is just a marriage certificate. If I say it is void, it is void." Pei Chin's face finally changed. Pei Chin's actions this time made my mother so mad she didn't eat for 3 days straight. Mother sent people to the Pei family to ask for the marriage certificate 4 times in total, and every time they were brushed off with various excuses. The first time they went, Mother Pei said the marriage certificate was locked under the ancestral tablets in the ancestral hall and couldn't be moved easily. The second time they went, they said Father Pei wasn't home, so no one could make the call to open the ancestral hall. The third time, they didn't even let them through the door, just saying the eldest son of the Pei family went out of town for medical treatment and his return date was undecided. I know this is all at Pei Chin's instigation. He knows all too well how he climbed to that position in the past life. Without the support of my Shy family, without me managing his connections and strategizing for him behind the scenes, and without my father strongly recommending him time and again in the court, a Tanhua like Pei Chin from a middle-class background wouldn't have reached the position of a 3rd-ranked vice minister, even if his ancestors' graves billowed green smoke. He understands better than anyone that his marriage engagement with me is the highest branch he can ever climb in his life. Once the engagement is completely broken off, there is not a chance in hell he'll ever find a second Shiyun. At the same time, he knows the me from the past life too well. He knows I have feelings for him, knows I am soft-hearted, and knows my anger always eventually fades. He thinks he just made a little mistake that all men make. What is the big deal about taking a concubine? Which high official or noble in the entire capital city doesn't have 3 wives and 4 concubines? He feels that as long as he lowers his head, admits his mistake, and says a few nice words in public, I'll get soft-hearted again and keep loving him just like in the past life. But he forgot one thing. I am someone who has been burned by fire. That kind of heart-wrenching pain can turn a woman's heart into iron. Since the Pei family is dead set on clinging to the marriage engagement, my mother decided to enter the palace and ask Her Majesty the Empress to take charge, using the Empress's words to choose a new marriage for me, completely cutting off the Pei family's delusions. Her Majesty the Empress is an old acquaintance of my mother's, a distant older cousin from my mother's maiden family. As long as my mother brings it up, this matter will most likely work out. But somehow the news leaked out. The noble consort's invitation to the flower viewing banquet arrived at the Prime Minister's residence before the Empress's reply. The gold-stamped red card, stamped with the noble consort's personal seal, sounded ridiculously friendly, hearing that Miss Xia has some free time lately. You are specially invited to a flower viewing banquet in 3 days to enjoy the spring scenery together with the young ladies and gentlemen of the capital. The noble consort is the 2nd prince's biological mother. Pei Chin's jaw moved fast. Knowing the Empress was going to pull the rug out from under him, he immediately brought out the noble consort to back him up. The massive contributions he made for the 2nd prince in his past life were apparently cashed in early in this one. On the day of the flower viewing banquet, I brought Chunhua and showed up as planned. The party was held at a royal villa in the west of the city. The front yard was planted with a massive patch of tree peonies and peony, the red, pink, white, and purple ones blooming layer upon layer, looking like a pile of brocade from afar. 50 or 60 young men and women from families of 5th-rank officials and above in the capital showed up. The girls were all dressed to the nines, the pearls and jewels in their hair nearly blinding you in the sunlight. The guys gathered in small groups in the gazebos, writing poetry and making couplets. sneaking glances at the women's section every now and then. Maybe because the scene Pei-chin caused at the gate of the Prime Minister's residence was too ugly. No one really gossiped about me to my face. A few young ladies I knew well even came over to talk to me on their own, mostly sounding like they were sticking up for me, saying Pei-chin was blind as a bat. As for whether they were actually sympathizing with me or gloating inside, I couldn't be bothered to figure it out. The routine of the flower viewing banquet was nothing more than women competing in beauty and men showing off their literary skills. Someone was playing the guqin in the main hall, someone was competing in calligraphy in the corridor, and someone was reciting a poem on the spot at a peony, winning cheers from the whole room. I was just here to go through the motions, so I found a quiet corner to sit down, drinking tea while looking at the garden scenery, plotting how to slip away early and go home later. But the more I wanted peace and quiet, the more people wouldn't let me have it. The noble consort headed straight for me as soon as she walked in. Today she wore a goose-yellow palace dress covered in gold, her hair done up high with a 9-tailed phoenix hairpin stuck in it. Her jade pendants jingled as she walked, looking super imposing. She came up to me, and before I could even stand up to bow, she reached out and grabbed my hand, acting as affectionate as if I were her own niece. I heard the Prime Minister's wife has been really stressing over your marriage lately. How about I play matchmaker for you? Before I could open my mouth, the noble consort gave a gentle wave with her other hand and someone stepped out from the crowd behind her. It was none other than Pei-chin. Today he wore a moon-white long gown with a green jade belt tied at his waist. His black hair was tied up with just a single white jade hairpin. He looked completely fresh and clean, truly an elegant young master, as gentle as jade. He walked over to the noble consort's side, bowed properly, and then turned to me, revealing a smile so gentle it gave me goosebumps. A yoon. Gazers from all directions swished and gathered completely on me. Some were watching the spectacle, some were enjoying the show, and some had eyes shining as if they had discovered something incredible. The noble consort put her arm around my shoulders, her tone sounding like she was playing peacemaker, but also bestowing a favor. Shi Yun, you are the legitimate daughter of the Shi family. I know you had a little argument with young Master Pei a few days ago, but you have to understand what man in this world doesn't have 3 wives and 4 concubines. It is just a concubine. Just treat it like raising an extra cat or dog at home. Why get angry with your future husband over this? Young Master Pei became a Tanhua scholar at such a young age. He has both talent and looks, and his future is limitless. To beg me to be the matchmaker, he knelt outside my palace for a full half day until his knees were swollen. I only agreed to this because I saw his absolute sincerity. If you miss out on such a good match, I am afraid you'll deeply regret it later. The noble consort guided my hand slightly toward Pei-chin's hand, asking with a smile, "Today, are you willing to give me face and make up with young Master Pei?" Pei-chin took the opportunity to step forward, bowed deeply, and held out a freshly snapped crabapple blossom to me with both hands. The branch still had morning dew on it, its petals of very delicate rouge color. He looked up at me, his eyes as clear as a spring, his voice so soft you could wring water from it. "Ayun, I was wrong about what happened before. Beat me or punish me however you want. I just beg Ayun to give me one more chance. My feelings for you, Ayun, are as clear as day, heaven and earth be my witness. If there is even half a lie in these words, let lightning strike me down and let me die a terrible death." His acting skills were truly top-notch. Right now, the way he looked at me was full of deep affection and tenderness, his face filled with careful anticipation, lowering himself lower than dirt. It was as if a gentle shake of my head would make him die of a broken heart right on the spot. With acting like this, he could be the star player in any theatre troupe. If I hadn't crawled my way back from hell, I probably really would have bought this sincerity of his. But if he can act, so can I. I looked at him, my eyes slowly turning red. Tears swirled in my eyes a few times before finally rolling down my cheeks. I choked out a question, my voice not loud but clear enough for everyone present to hear. "Pei-chin, is your so-called sincerity just embarrassing me in front of all these people time and time again?" I looked around and motioned for him to look at the dozens of eager faces around us, just waiting for a good show. Face after face, they were no different from an audience watching a play in a theatre. "First, you abandoned me on the day of our wedding. completely disregarding the dignity of a hall full of guests and the elders of both our families. Then you ran to the Liu family's door and took a concubine right in front of the house, raiding guards, publicly humiliating me, your legal wife, twice. After that, you brought betrothal gifts to the gates of the Prime Minister's residence, beating gongs and drums to make a scene, letting the whole city laugh at me as a joke. Today you even brought out Her Highness the noble consort to pressure me, forcing me to forgive you with all eyes on us. You keep saying it is for my own good, but every single thing you've done is just pushing me toward the edge of a cliff. This kind of sincerity of yours, how could I ever dare to accept it? I knew Peichin's intentions all too well. What he wanted was a massive crowd. What he wanted was everyone watching. He wanted to apologize and express his deep affection to me in front of all the officials' children in the capital, so he could use the crowd's wagging tongues to force my hand and make me agree to remarry him. But he didn't expect that with these exact same onlookers, and from the exact same position where he held me over the fire to roast, I could turn the tables and leave him completely unable to back down. I also bowed to the noble consort, my expression respectful, but my tone firm. Please forgive me, Your Highness the noble consort. Shi Yun appreciates your kindness, but the issue between Peichin and me has nothing to do with that concubine. I simply don't care about her at all. What I care about is that Peichin has repeatedly disregarded my dignity, and even today, knowing my difficult situation, he still chooses to pressure me this way. A marriage full of such scheming, let alone a good match, couldn't even be considered an ill-fated one. I shall take my leave first. I turned and left, walking briskly along the stone path through the flower beds. Hurried footsteps came from behind, and then a hand grabbed my wrist from behind. Peichin's fingers were ice cold, gripping my wrist with astonishing strength. His voice was mournful, as if his heart had been completely broken. Yun, what do you want me to do so you'll forgive me? I casually pointed to the side. Over there was a man-made lotus pond, its water shimmering under the afternoon sun. The pond was surrounded by a ring of taihu stones, with a few clumps of calamus growing in the crevices. Before I could even finish speaking, Peichin let go of my wrist and strode toward the lotus pond. He stepped over the taihu stone railing, leaped into the air, and jumped into the lotus pond with a splash amid a chorus of gasps. The pool water wasn't deep, only up to his chest, but he didn't know how to swim in our past life. We went boating on a lake one year. He was standing perfectly fine at the bow, but the moment the boat rocked, his face went completely pale and he clung tightly to the mast, refusing to let go. I remember this very clearly, so when he was thrashing around in the pool and sinking, choking on several mouthfuls of dirty water mixed with duckweed, a long-lost sense of satisfaction welled up in my heart. He flailed his arms in the water, thrashing while shouting intermittently, Yun, I jumped, forgive me. The people on the shore scrambled frantically to find a bamboo pole to fish him out. I stood by the edge of the pool, looking down at his pathetic struggle in the water. His hair was a mess, his soaking wet moon-white long robe clung to his body like a rag, and his face was covered in moss and waterweed leaves. He didn't look at all like the dashing young gentleman from just a moment ago. By the time he finally managed to grab the bamboo pole and crawl onto the bank, some people in the crowd of onlookers were already snickering. I bent down, got close to his ear, and finished what I hadn't finished saying earlier. If you drown to death, then I'll forgive you. Peichin was sprawled out on the bank, spitting up huge mouthfuls of water. Hearing this, his body visibly stiffened. I didn't look at him again and just turned away. Behind me was the noble consort's shrill voice yelling for the imperial doctor, and Xunhua's uncontrollable PFFT of laughter. My steps were light, so light it felt like walking on clouds. Naturally, Peichin didn't have the guts to actually drown himself. After someone fished him out with a bamboo pole, the rescuers were panicking so much that he ended up choking on water a bit longer. That very night, he caught a high fever and burned up for 3 whole days. Word has it that he was even calling my name while spouting delirious nonsense. People in the capital gossiped and added fuel to the fire about this for days. The storyteller's final conclusion was young Master Pei sincerely repents while Miss Seer has a heart of stone. So, using this jump, Peichin stepped all over me to win back a bit of his reputation as a devoted lover. Although he wasn't chased down the street by everyone like before, quite a few people started speaking up for him. Some said the miss of the Shi family was way too bossy and couldn't even tolerate one concubine. Others sighed that young Master Pei was just a hopeless romantic who didn't even care about his own life just to win back his old flame. More importantly, thanks to this reputation of being deeply in love, he caught the second prince's eye. The second prince, Xiao Hongxi, was short on hands. Seeing that Peichin was both talented and unscrupulous, he immediately took him under his wing and gave him important responsibilities. Peichin didn't let the second prince down either. In just a short month, he handled several tricky errands for him. The second prince got rewarded a few times in front of His Majesty the Emperor, and came to rely on Peichin even more. A guy demoted to Jiangzhou as a county deputy magistrate actually clung to the second prince's connection, used illness as an excuse to delay taking up his post, and instead stayed in the capital city to be the second prince's advisor. The folks at the Ministry of Personnel turned a blind eye to save face for the second prince, and shockingly, no one even pursued the matter. This world is just that unfair. I had my engagement broken off and my reputation was completely ruined, with everyone laughing at me as a joke. But Peichin broke his promises, took a concubine before marrying a wife, and just by putting on a few sob stories and saying some cheesy lines in public, he turned into a devoted lover worthy of sympathy. When a man messes up, the culprit is always the woman. It is not that he shouldn't have taken a concubine. It is that I wasn't generous enough, thank goodness. Her Majesty the Empress's decree came down very quickly. Perhaps the news of the noble consort forcefully sticking her neck out at the flower viewing banquet reached the Empress's ears, hitting a nerve. Her Majesty the Empress, citing the marriage between the Pei and Shi families has already damaged harmony and shouldn't be forced to continue, personally wrote an edict announcing the annulment of my engagement to Peichin and ordered the Pei family to return the marriage certificate to the Prime Minister's residence within 3 days. Now Peichin had no reason to hold on to it anymore. Her Majesty the Empress had spoken, and if he disobeyed again, it would be giving the Empress no face. That evening, Mother Pei personally brought the marriage certificate to the Prime Minister's residence. Her face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and after putting down the marriage certificate, she barely said a few words before leaving with her tail between her legs. Xinhua ran into my room holding the marriage certificate, jumping and laughing with joy. Miss, it is annulled. It is finally completely annulled. I took the marriage certificate and flipped it over to take a look. It had Peichin's birth chart written on it, and the ink was already a bit faded in my previous life. I treated this marriage certificate like a treasure and kept it safe in my jewelry box. Every New Year's Eve I would take it out to look at it, feeling that it was a good match bestowed upon me by heaven. Looking at it now, I just felt like every word on the paper had grown teeth, densely biting into my fingers. I handed it back to Xinhua. Take it to the kitchen and burn it. You got it. Xinhua ran off faster than a rabbit. After the engagement was cancelled, Peichin finally laid low for a few days. First, he was busy running errands for the second prince and couldn't get away. Second, the Empress had spoken, saying if he kept pestering, he'd be ungrateful. But even though he didn't show up again, his concubine stepped into the fray in his place. Every 2 or 3 days, Liu Susu would come to report in at the gate of the Prime Minister's residence. At first, she was pretty well behaved, kneeling at the base of the wall not far outside the main gate of the Prime Minister's residence, holding a handkerchief and lowering her head to shed tears whenever she saw someone. If people asked what she was doing, she'd say she was there to apologize to Miss C on her husband's behalf, saying everything was her fault and begging Miss C to forgive her husband. Passers-by hearing her soft voice and seeing her humble attitude felt that this concubine was actually quite sensible. But as Peichin managed to pull off a few big jobs for the second prince, the second prince's spotlight in the court grew brighter every day, and Peichin's worth went up with it, faintly showing signs of a comeback. When Liu Susu came to the gate of the Prime Minister's residence again, her crying and begging for forgiveness turned into disguised showing off. This time she would say, "Did sister know yesterday my husband got the water transport errand done for the Second Highness? And the Second Highness was so happy he gave him a set of inkstones from the previous dynasty, saying they were used by a Grand Secretary back then." The next time she'd change her sister, "Look, isn't my hairpin pretty? My husband bought it from Jimbao Jai the day before yesterday. He said they are South Sea pearls, and just one costs 10 taels of silver. My husband also said he will have a pure gold phoenix coronet made for me in the future." The time after that, she'd say, "This is fabric from Yunjin workshop. An inch of material is an inch of gold." My husband said I look good wearing plain colors, so he specially picked this bolt of moon white fabric with subtle patterns. "Sister, don't you think it suits me really well?" Every time she came, she wore gold and silver, dressing even more respectably than many main wives in the capital. Although she was just a concubine, she lived a more glamorous life than anyone. What was even more surprising was that she actually became the object of envy for many people. Some women said, "That concubine of the Liu family, we thought she was completely out of luck. Who knew she'd turn her life around with young Master Pei? Look at what she eats and wears. It is better than a lot of main wives." There were even young girls discussing in private, saying that if they could meet a husband like Pei Qin, who dotes on his concubine so much, being a concubine would be worth it. Junhua was so furious that she would stomp her feet and curse out loud every few days. Every time she came back after hearing the little maid's report, she would be unable to sit or stand still. Once she was truly so mad that she rolled up her sleeves and was about to take people to the door to beat Lu Susu out. I bit down on a preserved peach and stopped her. "Why are you beating her? Let her speak. Every time she speaks, she leaks what Pei Qin has been doing over at the second prince's side to me. I get free intel without even having to raise my own spies. Is there a better deal than this in the world?" Chunhua froze for a moment, then broke into a smile through her tears. "Miss, your mind is way too deep." I handed her a piece of preserved peach and continued flipping through the leisure book in my hand. Actually, I didn't need Lu Susu to tip me off to know what Pei Qin was doing. The Crown Prince's intelligence network covers the entire capital, and there are reports delivered every day. But every time I listen to Chunhua relay Lu Susu's showing off, it is like putting together a jigsaw puzzle, piecing the fragments leaking out of her mouth together one by one, verifying the intel in my hands. The real good show is still to come. This year's Mid-Autumn Festival. Princess Ningen invited me to Tianhua Temple outside the city to pray for blessings. Princess Ningen is the eldest legitimate daughter of His Majesty the Emperor and the Empress. She is 3 years younger than the Crown Prince and looks extremely similar to the Empress, elegant and bright. She and I have known each other since we were kids. Although we are not exactly bosom friends, we are still a bit closer than ordinary young ladies. Since she sent an invitation to invite me, there was no reason for me not to go. Traveling with us were a few noble ladies from the capital. Qin Xiao, the great general's daughter, came wearing a pomegranate red riding outfit with a riding crop tucked into her waist. She looked less like she was going to burn incense and pray, and more like she was heading to the hunting grounds to hunt. Du Qi, the daughter of the Minister of Works, was also there. She wore a goose-yellow dress and sat quietly in the carriage, holding a snow-white lion cat in her arms. There were also young ladies from 3 or 4 other official families, making it 7 or 8 of them in total. Counting the maids and older servants everyone brought, there were quite a few carriages altogether, heading out in a massive procession toward Mount Tianhua outside the city. Tianhua Temple was the most popular temple in the outskirts of the capital, dedicated to the Bodhisattva Guanyin. These few days around the Mid-Autumn Festival happened to be a temple fair. The area in front of the mountain gate was packed with all kinds of small stalls selling incense, peach wood charms and vegetarian pastries, jam-packed with people. Our group got scattered by the pilgrims right after we entered the mountain gate. Besides Chunhua, the only ones left by my side were Qin Xiao and Du Qi. There were just too many people, and the maids and older servants got shoved around in the crowd until they gradually got lost too. The 3 of us couldn't be bothered to squeeze through the crowd, so we just ducked into the small bamboo garden behind the side hall and found a stone bench to sit down and rest. There was a small patch of purple bamboo planted in the garden. The bamboo shadows danced, rustling whenever the wind blew, making it a rare spot of peace and quiet. Kunhua took the snacks we brought out of the food box and laid them out, then went to the temple's tea room to ask for a pot of plain tea. The three of us ate snacks and drank tea, chatting idly about this and that. Juchi was the most talkative. She was just talking about her family setting up a marriage prospect for her, saying the guy looked like a puffy steamed bun, and she cried all night after meeting him just once. Qin Xiao smiled and comforted her, saying the worst-case scenario was to just kick him away after all. She was the daughter of the Minister of Work, so who would dare bully her anyway? I hadn't even taken a few bites of the snacks when I started feeling off. First, my fingertips went numb. Then that numbness spread all the way up my arms and into my whole body. My eyelids started drooping, and my head felt as heavy as lead. I reached out to grab my teacup, but my hand was shaking so badly that the lid clattered. Juchi was still talking, but her voice was fading further and further away, like it was coming through a thick wall of water. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Qin Xiao swaying a bit too. Coming from a military background, her reflexes were quicker than mine. Her hand was already gripping the riding whip at her waist, but before she could even pull it out, she went completely limp. I saw her open her mouth to yell, but no sound came out, and then she went limp against my shoulder. My last memory right before plunging into the darkness was I saw a few tall, dark figures looming deep within the bamboo shadows, holding gleaming knives in their hands, muscle-weakening powder. This wasn't an accident. When I woke up again, the back of my head throbbed like someone had whacked it with a hammer. I forced my eyes open, and the first thing I saw was the mouldy ceiling beams above and a few torn spiderwebs. The air reeked of a pungent mix of cow dung and rotting hay. Sunlight leaked through the half-broken window lattice, lighting up the dust floating in the air. My hands were tied behind my back to a rough wooden pillar. The hemp rope around my wrists was so tight that just moving a little scraped off a layer of skin. Qin Xiao was tied to another pillar on my right. Juchi was on my left, still unconscious. His head slumped to the side and his hair plastered all over his face in a mess. My body still felt as limp as a puddle of mud, pinned down by the lingering effects of the muscle-weakening powder. I barely had the strength to lift a single finger, but I bit down hard on the tip of my tongue, and a rusty taste instantly filled my mouth. The pain stabbed into my temples like a needle, and my mind finally cleared up a bit. Pei Qin will come. I have to stay clear-headed to watch how this show plays out. 6 or 7 guys stood in the middle of the room, each one built like a tank with vicious-looking faces, their full beards looking like they were painted on with ink. One of them looked like the boss, with a hideous scar slashing diagonally from his brow bone to the corner of his mouth. He rested his ghost head broadsword on the ground, the tip of the blade still showing a smear of dark red blood. Scarface slammed his sword onto the ground and started loosening his belt, his dirty laughter sounding especially harsh in the empty, rundown house. We got pretty lucky today, boys. Originally, we just wanted to snatch one for some ransom silver, but ended up bagging 3 in one go. Look at this soft, delicate skin. Probably pampered little misses from an official's family, huh? Don't be scared, miss. We're just gonna have some fun. Once we get our rocks off, we'll naturally let you go. We ain't done tossing you around until it gets dark today. As soon as he finished talking, he started taking off his outer jacket. The other guys also chuckled and walked over. Juchi woke up right at this moment. The second she opened her eyes, she saw a burly man lunging at her and screamed until her voice almost cracked. Help! Somebody help! Let go of me! Woo woo woo! With a smack, a slap landed across her face, cutting off her scream instantly. The burly man slapped her left and right with 2 more strikes, hitting her so hard her head jerked to the side and blood oozed from the corner of her mouth. What the hell are you screaming for? Little bitch, scream your throat raw. No one is coming to save you. There isn't a single ghost in these mountains where birds don't even shit. Even if you scream until dawn tomorrow, not half a soul will show up. Simonon dragged Juchi away by the ankle. 2 other men walked toward Qin Xiao and me. One of them had already unfastened his pants buckle and reached out to grab my collar. Just as his hand was a finger's breadth away from touching my collar, Qin Xiao's originally limp body suddenly twitched. She turned her head and from a distance of 3 steps, used a breathy whisper that only I could hear to speak 3 words. Hold on longer. The next moment, she had already freed her right hand from the ropes. Her 5 fingers locked onto the burly man's wrist and twisted, making a muffled fid crack. Then she sprang up from the ground, kicking the man in front of her flying. His back slammed heavily into the wall, shaking loose a shower of crumbs from the earthen wall. A ghost head broadsword hit the ground with a faint clang, and she bent over to snatch it up in her hand. It turned out she had been waiting all along, waiting for the drug to wear off, waiting for the perfect moment. In the palm of her hand was a razor-thin, ground-down blade, which hadn't made a single sound when it cut the ropes just now. The daughter of great General Chintia, a heroine who grew up on horseback. If it weren't for someone intentionally drugging her with muscle-softening powder, these third-rate mountain bandits would only be fit to kneel before her and call her grandma. Scarface was the first to snap out of it. He tried to pull out his dagger, but before he could draw it, Qin Xiao's ghost head broadsword had already smacked sideways across his face. The back of the blade smashed into the bridge of his nose, 2 columns of blood sprayed out, and he screamed as he fell flat on his back. The remaining few drew their swords and surrounded her. But these guys were just a bunch of rabble, and wherever the gleam of Qin Xiao's blade passed just then, the door was kicked open from the outside. Take them down. The first to enter was a squad of personal guards in black armor, and the last to slowly stroll in was Crown Prince Xiao Hengzhou. Today he wore a tight-fitting dark martial outfit, a longsword hanging at his waist, and in his hand he held half a handkerchief still carrying the scent of rouge and powder. He must have set out to look for us even before our accident at Tianhua Temple. His gaze swept across the room. Lingering on Qin Xiao, the longest, the usually heroic and valiant woman was now panting heavily with disheveled hair, leaning on a dripping ghost head broadsword. A streak of blood splattered across her face. The Crown Prince's expression shifted several times. His jaw clenched extremely tight. He waved his hand at the personal guards behind him. Take them all down, leave one alive. Du Qi was helped up, still shaking all over. Qin Xiao dropped her knife and stumbled a step, and the Crown Prince reached out to catch her. He kept his voice super low, so low that only those standing right next to them could hear. Are you hurt? Qin Xiao shook her head and suddenly smiled a bit. Got here right on time. The Crown Prince didn't say anything, but his fingers gripping her arm tightened really hard. The bandits were dragged out like dead dogs by the guards. In the end, they only left behind the scar-faced guy Qin Xiao had knocked out with the back of her blade, chained hand and foot and tossed in a corner. I was just about to cut my own ropes when another group of people rushed in through the door. Leading the pack was the second Prince Xiao Hengxi, dressed in a super-fancy sapphire blue brocade robe. His jade belt was inlaid with pigeon egg-sized green jade. He was fair-faced and beardless, with a smile as friendly as an older brother next door. Pei Qin followed closely beside him, still carrying a first-aid medical box in his hand. He had sweat on his forehead, obviously having run all the way here. He sure knows how to put on an act. In my past life, seeing the second prince here, I was filled with gratitude. But now, looking at this beaming second prince, all I can think of is how heavy the snow was on the day 100 members of the Shai family were beheaded. Are you okay? Pei Qin feigned a frantic look and rushed straight toward me, shouting as he ran. As soon as I heard you were in trouble, I immediately brought my men and hurried over. I was scared to death. I was really scared to death. He threw himself at me, wanting to hug me, but before his hand even touched my sleeve, he was kicked away squarely in the chest. I kicked him myself. Using the small knife hidden in my sleeve, I had already ground through the ropes. I leaned against the pillar to stand up and planted a foot on his chest, kicking him 3 steps back. Thanks to the muscle-weakening powder, this kick wasn't heavy, but landing right on the old wound where he had been publicly beaten with a stick, it was enough to make him wince and grimace for a good while. Pei Qin, you really make me sick. I put the knife back into my sleeve and wiped the tears off my face. They flowed because the drugs went to my head just now, not for him. In my past life, I could never figure out who orchestrated this kidnapping. Our itinerary for this trip was clearly only known to those from the Prime Minister's residence and the Princess's residence, so how could a group of mountain bandits have laid an ambush in the bamboo forest by the side hall of Tianhua Temple ahead of time? Later on, while sorting through some letters by chance, I found a crumpled note with Pei Qin's handwriting. That note had been balled up and stuffed into a corner of the bookshelf like a piece of trash tossed aside. When I smoothed it out, It had a route map of Tianhua Temple and the number of people in the princess's entourage written on it. Back then, he wasn't really familiar with the second prince. It was only over half a year after the incident, when I was telling him the whole story of Qin Shiao marrying the second prince, like it was just family gossip, that he suddenly understood and praised the second prince played a good hand. But the date written in ink on that paper was clearly 3 days before the kidnapping took place. This plan was Pei Qin's doing from start to finish. In my past life, he did it to pave the way for the second prince. In this life, he is using the exact same script to suck up to the same master. Pei Qin clutched his chest and stood up, seeing the disgust in my eyes. His expression turned incredibly hurt, like a lovesick boy abandoned by his lover. But when he noticed the small knife in my hand, the act in his eyes immediately dialed back a notch, turning into confusion. The little knife was only a thumb wide and a palm long, with an incredibly thin blade. I'd swiped it from my father's study. It was a Western region's import that could slice through iron like mud. I usually kept it hidden in a secret compartment in my sleeve pocket, so even a body search might not turn it up. Pei Qin stared at the little knife for quite a while, his face looking weirder and weirder. That thought in his head gradually took shape, like a bug crawling out of the dirt and slowly growing wings. He didn't say another word to me until we headed down the mountain and got into our respective carriages. It was already dark by the time the carriages made it back to the entrance of the Prime Minister's residence. I held Shenhua's hand as I got out of the carriage. Just as I stepped onto the edge of the steps, a hand clamped down tightly on my arm from behind. Pei Qin yanked me right out of Kunhua's hands. His movements were so fast and aggressive that before Shenhua's gasp even faded, he had already dragged me behind a sycamore tree over half a person thick beside the carriage. His fingers dug into my arm, gripping so hard that his nails were almost sinking into my flesh. He looked down at me, his eyes completely red, his voice trembling, not shaking from crying, but from some kind of almost ecstatic thrill. "Ayun, tell me, did you come back too?" His eyes were terrifyingly bright in the dim lantern light. He looked like a ghost that had wandered the mortal world for half a lifetime. Finally recognizing one of its own kind, I kicked him in the leg bone again. I really used all my strength for this kick, and he let out a muffled groan and let go. I took 2 steps back, looking coldly at his face baring its teeth in pain. "If you are sick, go see a doctor, stop acting crazy in front of me." I turned around and walked toward the vermilion doors of the Prime Minister's residence. Shenhua had already cleverly gotten the doors opened, and several guards were hurrying out with lanterns in hand. Pei Qin didn't chase after me. He stood right there, clutching his aching kicked leg with one hand, and shouted something at my back. His voice was neither loud nor soft, just enough to pass through the night and reach my ears. "Ayun, you are mine. We are husband and wife in both our past life and this one, and no one can tear us apart." I didn't look back, nor did I stop walking. Shenhua, however, couldn't help but look back and curse, "What bad luck," before speeding up to follow me through the residence doors. The main doors closed behind us, cutting off the night outside, and that extremely obsessive gaze. On the 7th day after returning from Tianhua Temple, 2 decrees were issued from the palace. The first was a decree of joy. His Majesty the Emperor personally approved it, granting a marriage between the Crown Prince Xiao Hengzhou and Qin Shi, daughter of the great General Qin Tie. As soon as the decree was issued, the entire court celebrated, and even the tea houses on the streets hung out red silk. The second one was rather unseemly. The second Prince Xiao Hengxi's petition to marry Ju Qi, the daughter of the Minister of Works, as a secondary consort was rejected, but instead His Majesty the Emperor casually approved it with a permitted betrothing Ju Qi to the second prince as his primary consort. The reason was that on that day at Tianhua Temple, in the ruined temple, the second prince personally bandaged Du Qi's wound and touched the Du family young lady's hand right in front of the Crown Prince's personal guards. Since it concerned Du Qi's reputation, the Du family petitioned for the marriage, and after weighing it over and over, His Majesty the Emperor nodded his head. Du Qi wasn't willing, but once His Majesty the Emperor opened his mouth, her unwillingness was useless. The Du family was overjoyed, while the second prince's face was as black as iron. Originally, according to the plan Pei Qin designed for the second prince, the one who should have been rescued was Qin Xiao. The Qin family's military power combined with the second prince's ambition was the true match made in heaven. But as it turned out, the crown prince arrived a step ahead and beat him to rescuing Qin Xiao. Leaving the second prince stuck with only Du Qi, the Minister of Work's daughter, wasn't exactly bad, but compared to the Qin family with 80,000 elite troops in their hands, the difference was like heaven and earth. Perhaps dissatisfied with this marriage, the second prince kept making mistakes for the next little while. First, he publicly talked back to the crown prince at the morning assembly and was scolded by His Majesty the Emperor for being narrow-minded. Then he got into an argument with the crown prince outside the imperial study, waking up His Majesty the Emperor from his afternoon nap, and caught another scolding. His Majesty the Emperor's attitude grew colder and colder, and the second prince became totally irritable. Word is that even the servants in his mansion were trembling in fear, terrified he'd smash a cup on their heads. This irritability lasted all the way until the day of the autumn hunt, when it finally started getting better. The autumn hunt is a major annual event for the royal family. Thanks to His Majesty, the Emperor's Grace, officials of the third rank and above could bring their families along, following the imperial procession to the royal hunting grounds at Mount Tian in the capital's suburbs, staying there for about half a month in total. Mother thought it was too cold and didn't want to go out, so she had me go along to represent the Prime Minister's residence. There were over a dozen female family members traveling with us, including Du Qi and Lu Susu. The convoy heading to Mount Tian was massive, stretching out for miles, and I dozed off in my carriage the whole trip. When the convoy stopped to rest at a staging post, I got out for some fresh air, only to see Lu Susu and Du Qi getting into the same carriage. They sat shoulder to shoulder, acting all lovey-dovey. Looks like even though Pei Qin's last scheme failed, it still paved the way for his concubine in the lady circles. For Lu Susu to be able to squeeze into the same carriage as a proper princess consort, like Du Qi, shows just how much face the second prince's faction is giving Pei Qin. I didn't care. The Lu Su of today poses absolutely no threat to me. After we arrived at the Mount Tian temporary palace, Lu Susu actually came looking for me once on her own. The palace was built halfway up the mountain, with a wide-open terrace in front of the main hall overlooking the autumn scenery of the entire valley. I was standing right at the edge of the terrace, catching the mountain breeze and looking at the red leaves when she silently appeared right behind me. The very first thing out of her mouth almost made me laugh. "Miss Shi, you know perfectly well that Brother Qin loves you to death. He has always kept the main wife position open for you. Even after I begged him so many times, he still refused to make me his official wife. He follows the second prince, busting his ass to earn merits and rewards, all to build a future for you. Why do you have to go against him at every turn? For a woman to be treated so wholeheartedly by a man in this lifetime is already a blessing earned over several past lives. Miss Shi, you should learn to be satisfied." I turned around and looked at her. The mountain breeze sent the hair at her temples flying, and the two lustrous southern pearls on her earrings bobbed back and forth. Those were new stock that just arrived at Zhenbao Pavilion last month. I used to have a pair too, but they got burned up in the fire. Earn a future for me? I let out a laugh, laughing so hard my shoulders even shook. I am the daughter of the current Prime Minister. My older brother serves as a fourth-rank vice minister in the court, and my younger brother is among the top students at the Imperial Academy. Do I, Shiyu, need Pei Qin, a guy demoted to an 8th-rank assistant county magistrate, to earn a future for me? What kind of future is he earning? The future of a head constable at the Zhengzhou county office. Why don't you ask him if he can even save himself from having to take up that post in Zhengzhou right now? What is he going to use to earn anything for me? I took a step forward and Liu Susu subconsciously backed up. Her back hit the trunk of an old pine tree, knocking loose a few withered pine needles that fell onto her shoulder. As for that nonsense about the position of the official wife, that is an even bigger joke, other than you treating him like some treasure. Ask any of the noble ladies in the whole capital city who would ever look twice at a piece of trash who abandoned his wife to take a concubine on his wedding day, ruined his career, and dragged his whole family down with him. Miss Liu, I don't have anything against you, but stop being an eyesore in front of me. I was about to turn and leave, but my sleeve was grabbed. Looking down, I saw Lu Susu's fingers tightly gripping the fabric of my sleeve. her knuckles turning white from the force. Then, without any warning, her knees bent and she kneeled straight down on the busy palace terrace. Her voice was shrill and loud. "Sister, I know everything started because of me. I am the one who ruined things for you guys." People behind me had already stopped to watch. "As long as you promise to make up with Brother Chin, I'll go die right now." After saying that, she stood up and threw herself headfirst toward the old pine tree nearby. But her dash was extremely slow, not even making the hem of her clothes flutter. It looked more like she was walking toward the tree rather than crashing into it. Sure enough, before she even touched the tree bark, she crashed into someone's arms. Pei Chin appeared as if out of thin air, scooping her into his arms. He held her and coaxed her for a good while, stroking her hair and patting her back, his voice soft enough to melt winter ice. "Don't cry, Susu. Don't cry, don't do anything stupid. You scared me to death." Lu Susu cried a river of tears and snot in his arms, sobbing that he should just let her die so she wouldn't get in the way of his good match. The two of them hugged there, going back and forth making a scene for quite a while. Finally, Lu Susu broke into a smile through her tears, stood on her tiptoes and planted a loud kiss on his cheek before giving it a rest. Chunhua had been standing behind me the whole time, covering her eyes with one hand while struggling to pry open a gap between her fingers with the other. She leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Miss, will we get a sty from looking at this?" Ignored the smug look Lu Susu shot my way, as well as the complicated gaze Pei Chin was secretly sizing me up with from behind her. I grabbed Chunhua and turned to leave. "Yes, stop looking at this filthy stuff." Before we could get far, a flurry of footsteps caught up from behind. Pei Chin let go of Lu Susu and blocked my way. The softness on his face hadn't completely faded yet, but his eyes were already tinged with something deeper. He lowered his voice and said to me, with a barely discernible smile on his lips, "Ayun, I told you. You will be mine. Just wait a little longer. I'll be able to come and marry you very soon." The certainty in his eyes didn't seem like empty talk. He probably figured the second prince would have a huge harvest during this autumn hunt, and as a key supporter of the future emperor, let alone marrying me, it wouldn't even be impossible to brand me with the Pei surname by then. His fingers slowly closed in the air, as if trying to clutch something tightly in his palm. I smiled faintly. "Is that so? Then I'll be waiting." Returning to the quarters assigned to the women of the Prime Minister's residence, Qin Xiao was already waiting for me. She changed into an inconspicuous maid's outfit, and her hair was tied up into a double bun styled like a maid's. She was sitting in front of the bronze mirror smearing disguise paste on her face. As a layer of light brown paste went on, her originally handsome face instantly became a lot plainer. She glanced into the mirror and saw me, didn't stop what she was doing, and just said, "Pei Chin's people are going to make their move tomorrow during the autumn hunt." She handed me a crumpled note showing the second prince's manpower deployment for today. The southeast corner of the hunting grounds is where the crown prince hunts most often, and a squad of swordsmen posing as hunters had been planted there, led by a retired beast tamer who used to raise tigers for the second prince. "Get someone to change into the clothes of the crown prince's guards and lure the tiger into the second prince's trap," Qin Xiao said as she grabbed a thumb-sized wax pill from the table. Inside were key phrases extracted from the second prince's secret correspondence that I had spent days copying down. "Have your people dress up as servants from the second prince's estate, and give that beast tamer a message to lure the tiger towards the crown prince's tent. The guy is blind, relies on sound to identify people, and won't be able to tell the difference." I put the wax pill away safely and fished out that treasure from the hidden compartment at the bottom of the makeup box, a piece of soft golden armor woven from Western region's golden silk. Father spent a fortune getting this from a Persian merchant caravan, supposedly. Blades can't hack it open, arrows can't pierce it, and even a tiger would snap its fangs biting into it. I handed the soft armor to Qin Xiao. "Give this to His Highness the Crown Prince, and make sure he wears it on the inside of his hunting suit tomorrow." Qin Xiao folded the soft armor into a tiny piece and stuffed it into her sleeve, then took a blade from the interlayer of her shoe sole and slipped it into the sole of my shoe. The blade was only 2 fingers wide, but incredibly thin and sharp. It was forged from 100 refined steel by a bladesmith of the Qin family army, and could be hidden anywhere on a person without being found during a search. She patted my ankle and looked up at me. Ayun, are you scared? I looked down at my hands. In my past life, these hands only knew how to grind ink and brew tea, or embroider double-sided peonies under a lamp. They didn't even dare to kill a chicken. Now they are teaching the great general's daughter how to hide a blade, copying secret letters, and scheming to send someone into an abyss of eternal ruin. Scared, I said, my voice very soft, so soft that only the two of us could hear, but even more scared of being burned to death again. On the second night after the autumn hunt officially began, the prey were entering the depths of the hunting grounds to forage. On the 15th, Crown Prince Xiao Hengzhou took a dozen or so followers into the dense woods in the southeast corner of the hunting grounds. According to the hunting ground officials, the deer in that patch of woods were the fattest, making it a prime hunting spot specifically saved for the Crown Prince. But the first thing to run out wasn't a deer, it was a tiger with slanted eyes and a white forehead. The tiger, as big as a full-grown bull, leaped silently out of the bushes, its black and yellow stripes flashing through the morning mist. It lunged straight in the Crown Prince's direction, its forepaws making almost no sound as they skimmed over the pile of dead leaves, fast as a shadow. Just as the Crown Prince drew his bow, the tiger was already right in front of him. He turned sideways to dodge the fatal blow from the tiger's claws. The claws smacked his chest, tearing off a piece of his outer hunting robe. However, the golden silk soft armor hidden under the robe blocked all the force for him, leaving only a faint white mark on his chest. The claws made a teeth-aching, ear-piercing scraping sound as they scratched across the soft armor's surface, and the Crown Prince used the momentum to roll away, hiding behind a large pine tree. The tiger was about to pounce again, but the Crown Prince's personal guards, who were lying in ambush, had already charged out from the tree ridges and bushes in all directions. Meanwhile, at the other end of the hunting grounds, someone was also releasing a tiger. A beast tamer dressed in a hunter's outfit with sunken eye sockets and cloudy eyes opened the second cage door in the dark, whistled at the black tiger in the cage, then leaned close to the black tiger's ear and said hoarsely, "Go to the northwest corner, find the second highness, go." The black tiger flicked its tail, its forepaws landing silently, and darted into the pitch-black dense forest. The second Prince Xiao Hengxi hunted all day and had a bountiful harvest. His attendants set up a campfire outside the tent to roast venison, while he sat in the tent adjusting his hunting outfit in front of a bronze mirror. The first sound was the horses outside the tent suddenly neighing, and then all the horses in the entire camp panicked. The second prince lifted the curtain to come out and see what was going on, only to run head-on into a black tiger darting out from deep within the woods. He was knocked to the ground, and the tiger's claws brushed past his shoulder, tearing off a piece of flesh. Blood instantly soaked half his lapel. His attendants rushed over and wildly swung their blades at the black tiger, only managing to force it back after the fourth person struck. But the second prince's arm on the side torn by the tiger claws could no longer move, and 3 bloody gashes on his shoulder blade were deep enough to show bone. The commotion was too big, and the light of the torches alarmed half the hunting ground. His Majesty the Emperor personally came to the second prince's tent to check on him. As the royal physician bandaged the second prince, His Majesty the Emperor sat to the side and asked, "What happened?" The Crown Prince's personal guards escorted the beast tamer into the tent. The beast tamer knelt on the ground, trembling all over like a leaf, and in just a few words confessed the mastermind behind the scenes. The second prince ordered him to raise the tigers. The second prince ordered him to release the tiger into the Crown Prince's hunting grounds, and it was also the second prince who gave him the whistle for the second tiger. He fished out the iron whistle inlaid with the second prince's estate emblem from his sleeve, and tremblingly held it above his head. The second prince lay on the bed in too much pain to speak, without even the strength to argue his personal jade pendant had slipped from his waist during the scuffle, and somehow ended up in the haystack where the tiger cages were kept. When it was brought up and placed before His Majesty the Emperor, it still had a tuft of black tiger hair stuck to it, caught red-handed with the evidence. His Majesty the Emperor smashed his teacup. Tea and broken porcelain splattered all over the floor. The scalding tea splashed onto the second prince's face. He cried out and passed out from the pain again. From that day on until the end of the autumn hunt, the second prince was grounded in a side courtyard of the temporary palace to recover from his injuries. with royal guards kneeling all over the ground outside, forbidding anyone from entering or leaving. The noble consort received the news in the capital city and rushed to Mount Tian overnight. She kneeled outside His Majesty the Emperor's bedchamber and cried all night until her voice went completely hoarse and was finally carried back by eunuchs. His Majesty the Emperor softened a bit and didn't immediately strip the second prince of his title, but the noble consort was demoted to a concubine, moved out of her original bedchamber, and relocated to a remote palace room to live. With the second prince falling from power, the forces attached to him crumbled along with him. The people sent by the crown prince were like a comb, combing all the way from the imperial court down to the local levels, uprooting the personnel the second prince had planted over the years. At least a dozen officials in the 6 ministries were investigated, and the foundation of the second prince's faction suffered a devastating blow. As one of the second prince's most relied upon strategists, Pei Qin naturally couldn't escape the purge either. The power he had worked so hard to build up under the second prince vanished into thin air overnight. The 7th day after the autumn hunt ended, Pei Qin was waiting for me in the alley by the back door of the Prime Minister's residence. I don't know how he managed to slip out of the second prince's completely sealed-off tent, or how long he'd been waiting in this deserted alley. When I got out of the carriage, he was standing by the base of the wall, wearing a somewhat worn grey cloak with the brim pulled down really low. When he looked up, I barely recognized him. He had lost a whole lot of weight. His cheekbones stuck way out, his eye sockets were deeply sunken, and his lips were so dry and chapped they were peeling white skin. His eyes were completely bloodshot, and the clothes under that grey cloak weren't straightened out either, with half of his collar sticking out all crooked. Being used to seeing him looking so sharp and dashing in front of everyone, suddenly seeing him in this pathetic mess just felt ironic to me. Turns out a strategist who has lost his powerful master is this worthless. He looked into my eyes and spoke in an almost calm tone. "Sha Yun, sure enough, you've been reborn and came back, just like me." This was the second time he asked this question. The first time he was hesitant, but this time he had a definite answer. His gaze was complicated, grief mixed with longing, and within that longing was a trace of indescribable tenderness. He said, "Ayun, you hate me, right?" He paused, then finally let out the words he'd been choking back for so long. "I am sorry. The anger I'd been bottling up ever since my rebirth finally couldn't be held back anymore." I raised my hand and slapped Taichin hard across his gaunt cheek. I didn't hold back at all with this slap. The hot, stinging vibration from my palm told me his teeth were knocked loose. His head jerked to the side from the hit, the brim of his hat flipped over, and he staggered back against the alley wall. I took a step forward, squeezing my voice out through gritted teeth word by word. "Do you think a single sorry can just wipe away everything?" The agonizing pain of being swallowed by the flames, the sizzling sound of the fire burning my flesh, the searing pain of my windpipe tearing open as scalding smoke and ash flooded into my lungs, that pain of every single inch of skin burning all at once, is something no words can describe. My hands were burned pitch black, my nails digging into the wall streak by streak until they broke off, and even my bones cracked with crisp shattering sounds in the fire. All of this, I remember, word by word. It is branded into my bones. Pei Qin, you murdered my father and older brother, falsely accused my little brother of colluding with the enemy, and ruined my entire Shai family's century-old legacy in an instant. You didn't even let the youngest nephew in my family go. He was only 4. He hadn't even learned how to recite a whole Tang poem yet. Shouldn't I hate you? Pei Qin raised his hand and slapped himself, a vicious slap even harder than the one I gave him just now. His head jerked toward the wall once again, and his forehead struck the corner of a brick, drawing blood. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, looked up at me, and his voice was a bit muffled. "Ayun, I was wrong. I deserved to die. Then go die." I cut him off before he could finish. Pei Qin froze for a second. The bloodshot veins in his eyes seemed to grow even redder in that instant. He took a step forward, trying to explain. "Ayun, I have my reasons. Can you listen to me?" "I don't want to listen." I raised my hand to stop him from talking. I took a step back, retreating to the edge of the light at the mouth of the alley, and finished my words in an extremely cold tone. There has long been no tender past left between us to reminisce about. Ever since the night you burned me to death, there has only been one path left between us, a fight to the death. Now your master, the second prince, has fallen from power, your future is ruined, and Liu Susu is still waiting for you to provide for her. If you want to save her, turn things around, and stay alive, there is one last path you can take. I looked into his eyes and said those words. In our past life, the path where you guys forced the crown prince to death. In the last life, the crown prince's sweetheart was stolen. He lost a leg and kissed the throne goodbye. And the father he looked up to since he was a kid, for the sake of the so-called big picture, refused to deal with the killer who hurt him, and instead treated that killer as the ultimate heir. How could the crown prince not go crazy? After the crown prince was deposed, his leftover retainers egged him on to rebel. The second prince, who saw it all coming, used the excuse of saving the emperor to slaughter the crown prince's men to the last, and even the crown prince died at his hands. Not long after that palace coup, His Majesty the Emperor died, and the second prince smoothly took the throne. Now I've set up the direction signs for them at every turn of this road. Peichin didn't speak for a long time after hearing this. He leaned against the alley wall and looked at the moon in the sky, which was mostly hidden by clouds. After a really long time, he let out a slow and heavy sigh. Yoon, you know perfectly well that it is a dead end ahead. In that palace coup, the crown prince's leftover forces ended up completely wiped out, without a single survivor left alive. I smiled and said, "Of course I know. I want you guys to walk it even knowing it is a dead end. Otherwise, how do I pay tribute to the souls of the over 100 people of my Shia family?" Chin suddenly reached out to grab my hand, his voice turning almost frantic. "Yoon, stop messing around. Princes fighting for the throne is no joke, let alone something a woman like you should meddle in. It is true the second prince ordered the killing of the Shai family, but there was a reason for that. Your father's achievements are so great they threaten the emperor. No ruler can tolerate the existence of such a massive aristocratic family. When I was working for the second prince, I already begged him for a pardon warrant for you as long as you are willing to marry me. When the second prince ascends the throne, as long as Prime Minister Shai willingly goes to his death to atone, he will be lenient and not kill the rest of the Shai family, let alone implicate you." His knuckles gripping my wrist trembled slightly. "Yoon, I know you hate me, but I had no choice but to do those things. Where in this world is there anything absolutely perfect? Being able to keep you alive is already a tremendous grace." I pulled my hand back and took a few steps backward. The night wind swept through the alley, and I could hear the sound of the night watchman beating his clapper on the street in the distance. "What a joke," I said. "A prisoner, yet he wants my father to willingly go to his death. Peichin, are you stupid or am I? The second prince can't even save himself right now. Where does he get the right to issue any pardon warrant? The second prince hasn't completely lost." Peichin's voice suddenly sank, and that bit of fragile pain in his eyes was covered up by something more dangerous. He straightened up, leaned back against the wall and patted the dust off his robes, and called out something. The originally pitch-black corners at both ends of the alley suddenly lit up with torchlight, and over a dozen men gripping short weapons silently closed in. As the leader walked, the dagger tapped gently against his waist, making a rhythmic metallic sound. I was surrounded right in the middle. Peichin waved his hand. "Take them away, the maid too." My arms were pinned down. Chunghua struggled behind me, yelling, "Let go of my lady." But someone covered her mouth and hoisted her over their shoulder. The maid, being held down and dragged away, kept her head down, the hair at her temples covering half her face. Under the torchlight, the sallow complexion plastered on with disguised paste looked no different from real skin. I was the only one who noticed it. The corner of her mouth curled up slightly. I recognized that curve. That was Chinshea's habit before making a move. Peichin walked over to me, fixing the sleeves he had pulled askew, his movements unusually gentle. He tied the ribbons at my cuffs, then smoothed the loose hair by my temples, his voice soft, like he was coaxing a disobedient child. "Yoon, be good. Once it is done, I'll let you out, and we'll get married. Those years we can't go back to, we'll live through them again." We were pushed through a hidden door. The iron door crashed down behind us, hitting so hard that the ground was shaking. This was a pitch-black secret room built deep inside the rockery in the back garden of the Pei residence. From the outside, it just looked like a normal landscape mountain made of stacked Taihu stones. Inside, it had everything you'd need: a bed, a table, a candlestick, a chamber pot, and a bookshelf neatly lined with those old books I used to flip through in the Pei residence study in my past life. Even their positions were exactly the same as back then. He started preparing this place a long time ago, maybe from the first day he was reborn. Even before the wedding ceremony, he already had people get this place ready. After I was locked up by him, Pei Chin actually became a regular in the secret room. He couldn't even go a single day without coming over. Every time he came, he brought something. The first time, it was a handful of little white wildflowers blooming in the cracks of the rockery. He said he picked them in the back garden, and that in my past life I had picked the exact same flowers in the same spot, turning them into a floral bookmark pressed inside his document bag. He put the flowers right by my hand, eagerly waiting for me to say something. I didn't even touch them. The second time, it was a plate of osmanthus cake. He said it was from that shop in the south of the city, saying I smiled so sweetly when eating this cake in my past life, and that I even specially took Shunhua to wait in line for 2 hours just for a bite. He pushed the plate toward me over and over again. I didn't even touch it. The third time, it was a begonia-shaped jasper hairpin, exactly the same as the love token hairpin he gave me in my previous life. I closed my eyes and didn't look after sending things for 7 days. Pei Chin brought a wedding dress. That wedding dress was neatly folded and placed on a carved wooden tray, bright red shoe brocade, embroidered with a golden phoenix. The stitches so dense that not a single trace of light could pass through. It was the one I wore on the day I got married. In our past life, when he lifted the bridal veil, this was the wedding dress he saw. He held the wedding dress up against the candlelight. The firelight shone through the thin, bright red brocade, casting a warm red glow on her face. He tilted his head to look at me, and his smile reverted to when he was 26, back to the year before he had ever killed anyone, before he had ever coughed up blood, before he had become hideous in the officialdom. Ayun, you married me in your past life wearing this very wedding dress. You looked so beautiful back then. When I lifted the veil, my heart even skipped a beat. Once things are done tonight, let's get married again. Okay. He put down the wedding dress and left, his footsteps disappearing outside the iron gate. I sat leaning against the corner of the wall, listening to the sound of water from the artificial rockery overhead dripping down drop by drop. Qin Xiao was beside me, having recovered her original voice, and said softly, "Tonight, the city bell will ring 9 times after the 9 bell tolls. That is the signal to make our move." I gave a nod, slipped my hand into the sole of my shoe, and felt that thin blade, the cold metal pressed against my fingertip. I didn't wait for the 9th strike. In less than an hour, panicked footsteps came from outside the iron door, and someone pounded heavily on the door panel 3 times. When the door opened, Pei Chin practically tumbled in. He leaned unsteadily against the doorframe and slid down to a sit, his face and body completely covered in blood. The front of his clothes was slashed open from the collar down to the hem, and half a sleeve was nowhere to be found. He had a very, very deep knife wound on his shoulder. The flesh rolled back to expose the white bone underneath. He raised his eyes to look at me sitting upright like a mountain in the dark. His eyes filled with absolute disbelief. Bloody foam at the corners of his mouth dripped down mixed with his exhales, his voice so hoarse it sounded stuffed with sand. I clearly already locked you up. The news from the Crown Prince was cut off long ago. I calculated every detail flawlessly. How could I still lose? I sat within the halo of the candlelight in the secret room. My face, from not stepping out the door for 7 whole days, was translucently pale and illuminated by the firelight. It even looked a bit holy, but I didn't answer him. I just stood up from the shadows in the corner, kicking aside the long, cold incense burner at my feet. The incense ash inside spilled all over the floor. It was the damp dispelling incense sent by Pei Chin, swapped out daily by someone. He thought burning the spices would leave me groggy and powerless to resist. But he didn't know these incenses had been swapped out by Qin Shuiao on the very first day. The scent I was smelling and the scent he thought I was smelling were never the same at all. As for why I could still know what was going on outside while locked in the secret room, and still coordinate my actions with the timing Pei Chin probably wouldn't figure it out even until his death. That I wasn't the only one playing along with his act these past 7 days. There were also the Crown Prince's old subordinates, who he thought had already submitted to the second prince, and that captain he thought was going to open the city gates for him during the palace coup. That man's mother was an old servant of the Shai family. And only after seeing my handwritten letter did he realize that Pei Chin was the real culprit who caused the Shai family's extermination back then. To Pei Chin, this secret room was his final trump card. To me, it was nothing more than the pot of water used to boil the frog. I didn't explain it to him, but Pei Chin no longer had the energy to think about the answer. He staggered to his feet, grabbed that wedding dress with one hand and stumbled toward me. The candlelight flickered across his face. That once handsome and gentle face was now covered in blood spots and mud. Yet his expression was paranoid and devout, like a maddened believer holding aloft a prayer flag. There is no time left. We're doing the wedding ceremony now. Immediately, right here. He draped half of the wedding dress over me, fingers trembling so badly he couldn't even aim for my shoulders. As long as we finish the ceremony, your father won't let you be without a husband. Tomorrow I'll take you to see your father. He'll save me. He'll definitely save me, right? He was rambling incoherently, his eyes losing focus. I turned sideways to dodge the wedding dress fabric he shoved into my arms. Qin Xiao stood up silently from behind, raised her leg for a kick, the mud on the soles of her boots still carrying the damp stench of the secret room, and planted it squarely on Pei Chin's chest. He was sent flying, his back slamming heavily against the stone wall, and as he rebounded to the ground, he threw up a mouthful of dark red blood. Qin Xiao walked over, stepped 1 foot onto the pool of blood on Pei Chin's chest, turned to me and asked, "Ayun, what should we do with this piece of shit?" He convulsed all over in pain, but struggled to roll up his cloudy eyes to look at me. Our eyes met in the dim light. His eyes held everything. There was panic, pleading, the last tiny bit of burning desire to live, and a trace of confusion he probably didn't even realize himself, yet had flashed in his eyes for 2 lifetimes. I really did love her. How could she hate me this much? I looked at Pei Chin's face floating in the bloody froth and calmly spat out 2 words, "Light it." Qin Xiao had them drag him to the front yard. The responding Qin family guards had already taken down all the remaining servants in the Pei residence. The entire residence was brightly lit, with armed soldiers standing guard every 3 steps. We passed through the moon gate behind the rockery. I know every stone slab on this path in the back garden of the Pei residence by heart. I could walk to the front yard with my eyes closed. In my past life, I walked down this path over and over again. The last time I walked it, he was walking in front and I was being chased by fire from behind. Now it is the other way around. Pei Chin was tied to the ground with the immortal binding rope, his back leaning against the west wing room in the front yard. The doors were wide open, and inside was packed to the brim with dry firewood. To make it easier to carry, the dry wood was stacked waist high. Some fine sawdust spilled out from the cracks in the wood, scattering by the threshold and rustling as the night wind blew. His eyes suddenly widened. That door, that pile of firewood, this exact spot, he remembered it all. In his past life, when he stood outside the door to start the fire, right in front of him was a wing room just like this one, filled with pine firewood just as dry and ready to catch fire at the slightest touch. At the threshold of life and death, he really stopped being crazy. He became unusually quiet. He just sat leaning against the pile of firewood, tilted his head to the side, and softly shed tears. The tears mixed with the blood on his face, streaming down in faint red lines of water. Ayun, we obviously reincarnated together. His voice was so soft, settling into the air just before the wood caught fire, like weightless dust. You were just a woman of the inner courtyard, too scared to even kill a chicken. In my past life, I was a 3rd-rank official. Half the court had to bow and scrape to me, and even His Majesty the Emperor would ask if Lord Pei had arrived first thing when he saw me. How could I lose to you? How could I squatted in front of him, holding the newly lit candlestick. The candle flame flickered violently a few times in the evening breeze, almost blowing out before stubbornly flaring back up. I looked into Pei Chin's blood-red eyes and told him the answer. Because you are too greedy. You want power, you want fame, and you want love too. You and I have a fight to the death blood feud, yet you actually still wanted to marry me. But I am different. I just want you to die. Pei Qin closed his eyes, and the candle flame gave one last flicker deep within his pupils. Using his very last breath, he still asked me, Ayun, if on the day we got married, I hadn't ditched you to go find Susu, would you have? I wouldn't, never. I used the candle flame to light the first handful of pine firewood. The flames leaped up from that small handful of dry pine needles, licked the twigs and dry leaves piled beside it, and in an instant lit up the entire woodpile. The firelight reflected on Pei Qin's thin clothes, reflected on that half of his face caked in blood, and reflected into those eyes of his that looked at me one last time. The fire raged like a dragon, astonishingly fast. I tossed the candle away and turned to leave that door without stopping for a moment. The flames leaped onto the eaves, burning half the sky into a blood-red sunset. From the room behind me came the sound of his desperate screaming. He yelled my name, one after another. Every single one was the name he had tenderly called out in the study, in the backyard, and at the end of the long corridor 2 lifetimes ago. I didn't look back even once. I had people come in to put out the fire when it couldn't burn anymore. It is enough for this fire to just burn to death the people who deserve to die. It is not worth losing an extra mansion over. When the fire went out, the horizon was just starting to show the pale white of dawn. Faint light filtered in from outside the burned, broken walls falling onto the wet ashes covering the ground. Someone dug through the piles of ash for a long time, and later, when they came to report back to me, they only said one thing, "Miss, it is all burned clean." I looked up at the sky. The daylight began to outline the distant mountains. A thin layer of golden red spread beneath the clouds, like someone had lit a massive fire at the edge of the sky. The night I was burned to death by him in my past life, no one came to put out the fire for me. No one came to sift through the ash pile, and no one would say that phrase, "It is all burned clean." I was burned into a handful of ashes, scattered by the wind over the mass grave, mixed together with my father, older brothers, little brother, and the 100 members of the Shai family, unable to tell who was who. In this life, the one burned clean is him. The palace coup only lasted for one night, with Pei Qin trapped in the secret room by me. The most important contact person in the second prince's faction was gone. The crown prince's forces took a step ahead and seized the 4 city gates of the capital city, controlling the second prince's military camps in the city. The commander of the imperial guards at the palace gate was replaced by the crown prince's trusted aides during the night. The second prince took his last few personal guards and rushed to the palace city overnight, attempting to seize the imperial tea room before dawn news passed out by people. In the palace said that His Majesty the Emperor would personally go to the tea room every day at the Mao hour to brew the first pot of snow-crested verdant tea. When he arrived, the one brewing tea in the tea room was no longer a eunuch, but the crown prince, Xiao Hengzhou. The crown prince sat in front of the tea stove, the fire burning brightly. He used bamboo tongs to poke the charcoal, completely at ease. Seeing the second prince barge in with troops, he only lifted his eyelids. Second brother arrived early. The tea will take another quarter of an hour. The second prince froze at the door. The personal guards he brought didn't draw their swords because behind them, they were silently surrounded by Qin family soldiers wearing the armor of the royal army, whose numbers were more than triple theirs. The second prince took one last look at the crown prince, pulled his personal dagger from his sleeve, and with a swift slash, slit his own throat. When he fell to the ground, he knocked over a teacup by the stove. The cup rolled twice on the ground, the thin porcelain didn't break, and the tea seeped down along the cracks in the bricks. Xiao Hengzhou continued to brew his tea until the hour of Mao, then brought the first cup of snow-crested verdant tea to his imperial father's bedchamber to pay his respects. All of the second prince's men were taken down and locked up in the military camp to await execution according to the law. The Pei family, the Zhu family, along with the director in the Ministry of Personnel who acted as an informant for the second prince, were all completely purged Liu Susu, as Pei Qin's concubine was also detained according to the law. The second prince's treason implicated Pei Qin, and Pei Qin implicated her. She cried in the prison cell for 3 whole days and finally died of illness on the waterway while being escorted to the frontier. What a pity. Pei Qin came back with memories of 2 lifetimes, but in the end he still couldn't protect his little childhood sweetheart. Useless man. His Majesty the Emperor was already getting older, and his health steadily declined under the successive blows of the autumn hunt, and the second prince's treason. After the crown prince acted as regent for a year, the throne was yielded to the Eastern Palace, and on a day with warm spring breezes, he ascended the throne as emperor. The first thing Xiao Hengzhou did after ascending the throne was to summon me into the palace. The furnishings in the imperial study had already been changed, no longer the deep red sandalwood from the late emperor's era, but desks of a warmer, more elegant yellow pear wood. Outside the window was the spring light of late March, a magnolia tree leaning outside the crimson railing, white as snow. He sat behind the desk, the 12 beaded strings dangling from the imperial crown he had just put on, making his features look calm and distant. He looked up at me from the mountain of memorials and asked, "Miss Xi, you have done a great service for me. What reward do you want? Gold and silver, properties, titles, anything will do." His Majesty the Emperor, I do indeed have a request. Speak. I want to ask for a death exemption gold medallion for the Xi family. He frowned slightly. He wasn't an emperor who kept his feelings hidden. As a peacetime emperor, he hadn't yet learned to completely mask all his expressions. He thought for a moment, and when he spoke, his tone was sincere and direct. "You have merit, so I won't beat around the bush with you. The Xi family holds too much power. Your father controls the connections of half the court, and your older brother also has a foundation in the military. In this great Liang, I was born into a noble family, but I do not want to share the world with noble families. Do you understand what I mean?" I nodded. This subject understands. I will ask my father to resign from his position as Prime Minister and take our family back to our hometown to retire. His Majesty the Emperor looked at me and watched me for a long time. He was probably judging whether the woman before him truly understood or was just feigning compliance. Finally, he nodded, granted. He granted an extra favor, surprisingly promising that my older and younger brothers could stay in the capital. My older brother wouldn't need to resign from his post, and my younger brother could continue studying at the Imperial Academy for the future imperial exams. So it wasn't all for nothing. On the early morning that the Xia family's returning convoy left the capital city, the sky was just starting to brighten. Qin Xiao rode a horse all by herself, chased us for 10 li and intercepted our carriage by the ferry crossing. Her forehead was covered in sweat when she jumped off the horse. She held a bundle in her hand but didn't give it to me. Instead, she first tapped my shoulder with her horsewhip and asked, "You made such a massive contribution. But in the end, you are leaving the capital city with your whole family to return home. Ayun, are you really okay with this?" I lifted the curtain and leaned half my body out of the carriage. In the chilly March morning wind, Qin Xiao's face was just as strikingly heroic as it was back in that ruined temple when she snatched the ghost head broadsword off the ground. I don't have many people I can trust, and she is one of them. During those 7 days in the secret room, she heard everything, but she never asked a single word. I asked her, "Do you think I'd just let it go?" She told the truth, "Doesn't look like it. Just laying low for now. I'll go back to the capital city sooner or later. Ayun, am someone who is going to do great things in this life." She burst out laughing and rested her horsewhip on her shoulder. "All right, I'll be waiting for you to come back." During those years, the first wooden plaque of the Shai Family Girls' School was hung up in the east wing of the old mansion by the banks of the Huai River. On the first day of school, 3 people showed up. One was the daughter of the town's rice shop boss, who was scolded in front of everyone for half a street but still bit the bullet and came. Another was the youngest daughter of the tofu-selling widow, saying she came because we don't charge tuition, secretly stuffing soybean dregs cakes into her mouth while sharpening her pencil. The last one was the most special, a beggar girl picked up off the street. I hauled her into the wash tub and washed her in 3 changes of water, then stayed up all night altering some unwanted old clothes from Shunhua pawn shop to fit her. She sat in the back row, her feet dangling and swinging in the air, her eyes shining like lit lamps. The townspeople gathered outside the private school, pointing fingers and gossiping. Some clung to the wall to peek inside, some rolled their eyes at Chunhua, and some said the Xu family miss had her brain damaged from the broken engagement, leaving a perfectly good life in the capital city behind to come back to the countryside and teach women to read. Chunhua still had her same old temper, rolling up her sleeves ready to run out and swear at people. I held her back and continued turning to the first chapter of the Analects I had on hand. The 3 students below sat perfectly straight, reading along with me, to learn and practice it from time to time. Is it not a joy? The crisp sound of reading aloud was like waves crashing against the shore, rippling outward circle by circle from the east wing, and rippling right into the narrow grey alley outside the old house. 1 year later, the number of students became 30. 3 years later, it became 300. The wooden plaque of the Shi family's girls' school was hung in the prefecture, hung in the provincial capital, and then hung in the capital city. Qin Shiao sent someone to deliver a letter to me in that early autumn, and there was only one sentence in the letter. Her Majesty the Empress has agreed to be the headmaster of the girls' school. After some more time, the new emperor issued an edict that women could also enter the court. On the day the imperial examination results were released in the early spring of the 2nd year, at the end of the golden list, the names of 4 girls' school students were impressively listed. That day I stood on the city wall of the capital city, watching the palace gate open wide, and women in brand new official uniforms filing in. Some of them wore married women's hair buns, some still wore the double buns of young girls. Some were widows who once sewed and mended under a soybean oil lamp to subsidize their family expenses, and some were daughters who had escaped marriage, been beaten, and been pointed at and scolded all their lives. But at this moment, they all held their heads high and puffed out their chests, stepping on the bluestone official road under their feet, their footsteps pounding out resounding doo-doo echoes. I lowered my head and looked at these hands of mine. These hands had been scorched in the fire and had also ground ink and brewed tea for a person, being a gentle and obedient wife for half a lifetime. Now they will only hold a pen, hold a book, and hold the direction of the road under my own feet. This world is unfair to women, then let women fight for it themselves. As for those things about love and romance, having them is fine, not having them is fine too. All right, the story has completely concluded here. The game logic of this story is different from all previous cases. It is an extreme clash of double rebirth. 2 people return to the starting point with completely equal memory reserves, but choose entirely opposite action paths. Pei Qin chooses to use the knowledge of his previous life to fix his regrets, saving Lu Susu, while Shi Yun chooses to use the knowledge of her previous life to create a reckoning, destroying him. This is exactly what she said. You want power, you want reputation, and you want a lover. But I am different, I just want you dead. When I was building this narrative system, the core design was timeline control. Under the double rebirth setting, whoever controls the pace of time controls the victory. The first thing Shi Yun did wasn't getting angry or making accusations, but accurately calculating the time the imperial edict would arrive at the Liu residence, and then deliberately delaying the auspicious time for the wedding by half an hour. This detail determined the starting point of the entire game. Pei Qin thought he was making a proactive choice, but actually, from the very first step he took out at the wedding hall, he had already stepped onto the track Xia Yun laid out for him. All the coincidences in the second half, him thrashing around in the lotus pond, him saving someone at Tianhua Temple, him getting trapped in the secret room, essentially all stemmed from the careful orchestration of this initial moment. An equally brilliant design is the truth of those 7 days in the secret room. Pei Qin thought he was imprisoning Xie Yun, but in reality, Xie Yun was using the stage he provided to complete the final layout. The incense he sent was swapped. The Crown Prince's former subordinates, whom he thought had submitted to the second prince, were double agents all along. And the reason the person who opened the city gates for him betrayed him was because of a handwritten letter from a former servant of the Shi family. These 7 days were control for Pei Qin, and waiting for Shi Yun, waiting for the bell of the palace coup to ring, waiting for him to finish shouting her name one last time in the fire. At the end of the story, Xia Yun squatted down in front of Pei Qin and lit the pine firewood at the exact same spot in the exact same courtyard where he burned her to death in the previous life. This is not simple eye for an eye revenge. This is a ritualistic mirrored reckoning, what you made me learn in the fire. I am now giving back to you exactly as it is. I am Maggie Liu. Some people are reborn to start over, while some are reborn to end it again. The key is whether that trump card in your hand is for the opponent to see or saved for yourself to use.